Hi guys. Tonight, we journey back in time to a place where survival was a battle against nature itself. Picture the harsh winds cutting through the air, the snow swirling in every direction as you trudge through the blizzard. The cold feels like it could freeze your bones, and yet, people lived, thrived even, in these deadly conditions. You're in Viking territory now. In the early centuries of the Middle Ages, Vikings faced some of the harshest winters known to humanity. So, how did they survive, let alone build shelters that could withstand such deadly blizzards? Now, imagine being one of those Vikings. You step outside your longhouse, squinting into the driving snowstorm that has engulfed everything around you. The freezing wind howls in your ears, and the weight of the snow on the roofs of homes creaks as if threatening to collapse. Yet, your shelter, a longhouse, stands strong, an ancient marvel of engineering, built not just to keep the cold at bay but to protect your family from the bitterest elements. How did they manage to build such structures that could survive the elements without freezing to death? Let's delve deeper into the answers. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. I love hearing from you all. Now, dim the lights and settle in, because we're about to embark on a journey through the icy lands of the Viking world and discover how they survived the fiercest winters. The world of the Vikings wasn't one that offered much warmth. For much of the year, they faced freezing temperatures, heavy snowstorms, and relentless winds. You can almost feel the biting cold as you step into the Viking world. The northern lands of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, to name just a few, were their home. Winter was long, stretching from October to March, with temperatures dipping well below freezing. But despite these harsh conditions, the Vikings not only survived, they thrived. To picture this, think of a landscape covered in thick snow, with mountains towering in the distance and the icy winds whipping across vast stretches of barren land. You're standing at the edge of a forest, where a small Viking settlement sits nestled between trees. A longhouse wide, low, and solid stands in the center. Its timber frame, reinforced with moss, animal skins, and mud, offers shelter from the storm, a refuge from the elements. But to understand how these homes could withstand such cold, we need to dive into the details of Viking architecture and the ingenious ways they used the resources around them to survive. The longhouse was the Viking home and the center of their lives. These were not merely houses, they were well thought out, multifunctional structures that were designed for the Viking way of life. The typical longhouse was long, often as much as 60 feet, and low to the ground, with a thatched roof that curled in steep angles. The design was intentional. A low profile meant the structure was less susceptible to the fierce winds that could tear across the landscape, and its length allowed it to house a number of families together, providing warmth and safety through collective living. Historians still debate the exact origins of the longhouse, with some arguing that it was influenced by Roman or even Celtic designs, while others suggest the Vikings had their own, independent architectural style that evolved based on the needs of their environment. One thing is clear, though: the longhouse was not just a place to sleep, it was a fortress against nature's fury. You're standing at the threshold of a Viking longhouse, the chill of the air biting at your cheeks as you prepare to step inside. The wind howls louder, yet the heavy wooden door, reinforced with iron bands, creaks open with surprising ease. As you enter, the warmth from the hearth immediately wraps around you, a comforting embrace after the cold outside. The interior of the longhouse is a world apart from the storm outside, a place of life, warmth, and survival. The walls, lined with animal hides and the smell of smoke filling the air, tell you that this structure wasn't just built to house people, it was a lifeline, crafted to endure the deadly blizzards of the north. The Viking longhouse wasn't just about providing a roof over their heads. It was the cornerstone of survival in a place where the environment was as unforgiving as it was beautiful. To understand why the longhouse was so effective, we need to dig deeper into the materials the Vikings used and how they harnessed the resources around them to build their homes. Each element of the longhouse was carefully crafted, not just to provide shelter, but to maximize warmth, safety, and functionality in the face of one of the most challenging climates on Earth. Let's begin with the framing of the longhouse. Imagine the forest surrounding the Viking settlement, thick with tall, straight trees, their trunks strong and tall, just waiting to be used. The Vikings weren't just chopping down trees at random, they were looking for the perfect timber that would make up the bones of their shelter. They used materials from a variety of trees, primarily oak, pine, and fir. These trees were strong enough to support the weight of the roof and withstand the brutal conditions of winter, but also flexible enough to be shaped into the necessary beams and supports. Crafting the frame wasn't a simple task. It required careful planning, skill, and knowledge of the land. The Vikings didn't have modern tools like power saws or drills, so they relied on axes, chisels, and their own ingenuity to shape and carve the wood. The frame of the longhouse was typically made from large posts and beams, placed in a rectangular formation. Once the frame was complete, it would be covered with a thick layer of insulating materials to provide protection from the cold. Historians still argue about how much Viking architecture was influenced by outside cultures, particularly the Celts and Romans. But what is clear is that Viking craftsmanship was remarkably advanced for its time. The Vikings were masters of timber construction, utilizing a blend of techniques passed down through generations. They also took advantage of the materials at hand. Every bit of timber, every piece of stone, every scrap of hide was used to the fullest. They were skilled at scavenging the environment to ensure their homes could withstand the elements. Now, imagine yourself standing next to the longhouse as it begins to take shape. The frame is nearly complete, and the roof, an essential element of the design, is about to be added. The roof wasn't just an afterthought. It was a critical part of the structure, designed to protect against the weight of snow and the relentless winds that often blew across the northern landscape. Viking roofs were steeply pitched, designed with angles sharp enough to prevent snow from accumulating. This was crucial because a buildup of snow could collapse a roof, or worse, create dangerous conditions inside the longhouse. But it wasn't just about the pitch. The Vikings also covered the roof with layers of thatch, sod, or even bark. These materials acted as insulation, trapping heat inside and providing a barrier against the cold. The sod, in particular, was a clever addition. It acted like a natural insulator, keeping warmth in and the cold out, while also preventing the roof from being blown away by fierce winds. But what about the walls? The outer walls of the longhouse were equally important when it came to survival in the harsh northern winters. The Vikings didn't rely on just wood alone for their walls. They incorporated a combination of materials to ensure the structure was as insulated as possible. The outer walls were often built using timber frames, but the gaps between the beams were filled with a mixture of mud, moss, and animal hair. This created an airtight seal, keeping the wind from infiltrating the longhouse and ensuring that the heat generated by the hearth stayed inside. As you run your fingers along the rough surface of the walls, you can feel the texture of the moss and mud. The moss, in particular, was a clever choice. Not only did it act as insulation, but it also absorbed moisture from the air, preventing the walls from rotting and helping to regulate the temperature inside the longhouse. The Vikings were experts at using every resource available to them, and nothing went to waste. Every layer of material was carefully chosen to ensure that the longhouse could survive the brutal cold and the relentless storms that came with it. The most important part of any Viking longhouse, though, was the hearth. In the center of the longhouse, you can see a large, circular stone hearth, with a fire burning brightly. This was the heart of Viking life, a place where families gathered, meals were cooked, and warmth was generated. The hearth wasn't just a source of comfort, it was essential for survival in the cold, dark winters. The heat from the fire radiated throughout the longhouse, keeping everyone inside warm and cozy, even when the temperatures outside plummeted. But the hearth wasn't just for warmth, it was also for cooking. The Vikings relied heavily on meat, fish, and dairy, which they prepared over the open flame. The hearth was the center of Viking social life, where stories were told, songs were sung, and important decisions were made. Without the warmth and functionality of the hearth, the longhouse would have been little more than a cold, lifeless shelter. As you sit by the fire, the warmth of the flames crackling and popping, you can imagine the bustling activity around the hearth. Families huddled close, sharing stories and meals, their laughter echoing through the walls. The hearth wasn't just a physical necessity, it was the glue that held the Viking community together during the harsh winter months. But let's not forget the importance of insulation in Viking homes. Animal hides were another essential element in their survival strategy. The thick hides of reindeer, bears, and other animals were draped over the walls and hung from the rafters, providing an extra layer of warmth. The hides helped trap heat inside the longhouse, keeping the cold at bay and preventing frostbite, a constant danger in the unforgiving climate of the north. The use of animal hides was not just practical, it was also symbolic. The Vikings believed that the spirits of animals could protect them, and the hides of certain creatures were considered sacred. For example, the hide of a bear was thought to confer strength and protection, while the reindeer was associated with speed and endurance. In a way, these animal skins were more than just insulation, they were a connection to the spirit world, a reminder that the Vikings were deeply intertwined with nature. You stand at the edge of the settlement, your eyes tracing the jagged horizon where snowflakes swirl and the winds cut through the frozen air. The longhouse is a beacon of warmth, its sturdy frame defying the furious storm outside. As you step further into the heart of the Viking world, it becomes clear this was no simple structure. This was a living testament to human perseverance against nature's wrath, built to ensure survival in the deadliest of winters. But what truly set these shelters apart from others of their time? It wasn't just the materials or the construction techniques, it was the mindset that shaped their design. Vikings didn't view survival as a passive process. They saw it as an active, relentless pursuit. Each element of their shelter was crafted with purpose, reflecting their constant battle against the elements. As you imagine yourself within this longhouse, you can almost feel the weight of that mindset, a mindset that permeated every aspect of Viking life. This wasn't about mere physical endurance, it was about a mentality that embraced hardship, that found ingenuity in adversity. The Vikings, known for their seafaring conquests and warrior spirit, were also incredible survivors in the harshest conditions. Their world was one of extremes, bone-chilling winters, long nights, and the ever-present threat of the wild. And yet, their homes, built to withstand these conditions, were nothing short of extraordinary. Historians have long acknowledged that the Viking way of life was deeply intertwined with the natural world, and the homes they built were a direct reflection of this connection. It's fascinating how the Vikings' need for survival shaped their approach to shelter. While they may not have had the luxury of modern heating or insulation, they compensated with a deep understanding of the resources available to them. The materials they used weren't just practical, they were a reflection of the Viking philosophy. Wood, stone, and animal hides were all integral to the longhouse, creating a structure that was as much a fortress as it was a home. Now, think of yourself in the midst of a fierce storm, the snow piling high outside. The wind howls like a living thing, trying to tear through the gaps in the walls, but you're safe inside. The longhouse stands tall, a testament to the Viking ability to adapt and overcome. The thick walls, built from timber and reinforced with layers of moss and animal hair, act as a barrier against the cold, holding the warmth from the fire at the center of the room. The fire, a vital source of heat, crackles in the hearth, sending flickers of light dancing along the walls. It's the heart of the home, a source of comfort, warmth, and life. But it wasn't just about warmth. The Viking longhouse was designed with functionality in mind. It wasn't just a shelter for the cold, it was a living space that had to serve multiple purposes. It was a place for sleeping, eating, socializing, and even working. Viking society was built around community. and the longhouse reflected this. With its large, open space, the longhouse was a communal hub where families gathered, shared meals, and conducted business. It was a place where the family unit came together to endure the long, dark winters, strengthening the bonds of kinship and unity. This idea of survival through community was central to the Viking way of life. While the harshness of the environment forced them to adapt, it also forged a strong sense of cooperation. The longhouse was built to accommodate multiple families, with sleeping quarters arranged around the central hearth. This layout wasn't just about maximizing space, it was about ensuring that warmth and safety could be shared. In times of extreme cold, the collective warmth of several families huddled together was enough to keep the temperature bearable, even when the winds outside howled and the snow piled up. It's interesting to consider the mentalities that shaped Viking architecture. Some scholars suggest that the need for communal living during the winter months may have been influenced by the harsh Scandinavian winters, which made isolation dangerous. In fact, this communal approach wasn't unique to the Vikings. Many ancient cultures faced similar conditions and developed similar strategies for survival. But the Vikings were masters of efficiency, and their approach to shelter, both in terms of construction and communal living, was truly remarkable. As you sit by the hearth, the warmth from the fire sinking into your bones, consider the materials used to create such a shelter. The Vikings didn't have access to modern insulation or synthetic materials, yet they were able to create homes that could withstand the cold with remarkable success. The use of animal hides was key to this. Thick furs lined the walls, providing not only insulation but also a sense of protection. The hides, which could be sourced from reindeer, elk, or bears, were more than just practical materials. They were an integral part of Viking culture and survival. These animal skins were carefully prepared, with every part of the animal used to its fullest potential. The furs provided warmth, while the hides could be used for roofing, clothing, and even bedding. It's fascinating how the Vikings integrated the natural world into every aspect of their lives. Every material they used, whether it was timber, stone, or animal hide, was chosen not just for its practicality, but also because it held a deeper connection to their environment and culture. But there's more to the Viking shelter than just the physical structure. Historians still debate the exact role that spiritual beliefs played in the construction of Viking homes. Some argue that the use of animal hides and the centrality of the hearth may have had spiritual significance, connecting the family to their ancestors or to the natural world. Others believe that the Viking longhouse was a reflection of the Viking worldview, an acknowledgement that survival in such harsh conditions required not just physical strength, but also mental and spiritual resilience. For the Vikings, survival wasn't just a matter of living through the cold, it was about adapting, thriving, and creating a life that was in harmony with the harsh environment. This is evident in their homes, which were not only shelters but symbols of their connection to the land, the animals, and each other. And while the longhouse may seem like a simple structure, it was, in fact, a sophisticated solution to one of humanity's most basic challenges: how to survive in a world that is often harsh, unpredictable, and unforgiving. As you sit by the fire in the longhouse, the warmth enveloping you, you realize that the Vikings were not just survivors, they were masters of adaptation, able to thrive in one of the coldest, most brutal climates on Earth. The longhouse, with its combination of warmth, protection, and community, was the ultimate tool for survival. And as you settle in for the night, with the wind still howling outside, you can't help but feel a sense of awe for the people who built these shelters, not just to survive, but to live. The cold wind is relentless as it howls across the snow-covered landscape, but inside the longhouse you find solace. The fire at the center crackles, casting a warm glow over the wooden beams and animal hides draped on the walls. The walls, though simple in appearance, are packed with layers of resources, carefully selected by the Vikings to ensure that this structure could withstand the most brutal winter storms. But have you ever wondered what specific techniques they used to make their homes even more efficient against the biting cold. To fully appreciate the ingenuity of Viking architecture, it's important to take a closer look at how they managed to keep their homes insulated. It wasn't just about the materials used to build the structure, it was also about how the Vikings manipulated their environment to optimize their living conditions. They were experts at creating an airtight, insulated barrier between themselves and the unforgiving cold. Imagine yourself wrapped in a thick layer of warm furs, your face glowing from the fire's heat as you stare at the walls of the longhouse. The materials, the wood, the moss, the animal hides work together, ensuring that no cold air can creep in. The longhouse walls were constructed with a timber frame, but that was just the beginning. Between the beams, the Vikings packed a combination of moss, mud, and animal hair. The moss, which grew abundantly in the northern forests, was a perfect material for insulation. When it was packed into the gaps between the beams, it acted as a natural barrier against the cold, preventing the wind from sneaking through. The mud added to the strength of the walls, holding everything together and preventing any gaps that could let in drafts. But the real genius of Viking construction lay in the combination of materials. The animal hair, gathered from their livestock, provided an extra layer of warmth. The Vikings didn't let anything go to waste, and every scrap of material was put to good use. Imagine feeling the rough texture of animal hair against your skin as it sits within the walls, a humble yet effective insulator against the freezing temperatures outside. These simple, yet effective solutions were the backbone of Viking winter survival. The roofing materials were just as carefully chosen as the walls. The Vikings used sod grass and earth on top of their thatched roofs, an ingenious method that further increased the insulating properties of the home. The thick layers of sod trapped heat inside the longhouse, and the roof's steep pitch allowed snow to slide off, preventing it from building up and possibly collapsing the structure. It's hard to imagine the harsh snowstorms that would rage outside while the longhouse remained sheltered and warm, but it was all thanks to the combination of natural materials and the Viking craftsmanship. Historians have long acknowledged that the Vikings' ability to build these resilient homes was essential for their survival in the north. But what's even more remarkable is how they maintained the longhouses during the long winters. With such brutal conditions outside, repairs were often necessary, and the Vikings had a systematic approach to keeping their homes in top condition. They would regularly check the roofs for damage, patching up any holes with new sod or replacing thatch that had been worn down by the snow. These houses weren't just built and left to stand. The Vikings continuously worked to ensure their survival. Interestingly, scholars have debated the Vikings' approach to repairs and maintenance. Some believe that the maintenance of their homes was a community effort, with neighbors working together to make sure that everyone's shelter was in good shape. This theory is based on the communal nature of Viking society, where people often worked together for mutual survival. Others argue that repairs were more individualistic, with each family being responsible for their own shelter. Regardless of the method, it's clear that the Vikings understood the importance of constant upkeep and were always prepared to adapt to changing conditions. But what about the roofs themselves? You can't help but marvel at the complex design. The Viking roof was built to handle the extreme elements that the north could throw at it, yet it was also built with a sense of practicality. Snow, while it could be dangerous, also provided a natural layer of insulation. As the snow piled up on the roof, it formed an additional barrier against the cold, trapping warmth inside the longhouse. This was another example of how the Vikings took full advantage of the environment rather than trying to fight it. In fact, some scholars have suggested that the Vikings' deep connection to their environment played a role in the design of their homes. They didn't just build shelters to survive the cold, they built shelters that worked with nature. The roofs weren't just insulated by snow and sod, they were designed to handle the weight of it too. Imagine the tremendous pressure from the snow piling up after each storm. A poorly designed roof could easily collapse under the weight, but the Vikings were masters of design. The steep pitch of the roof allowed snow to slide off, keeping the weight from becoming an issue. But even then, the Vikings weren't relying on just a pitched roof for protection. They built their roofs with thick layers of thatch, ensuring that the snow and rain couldn't penetrate through to the interior. This added another layer of protection from the elements. In the midst of all this craftsmanship, there's a small but fascinating tidbit that many overlook. The Vikings were also known for their creativity in adorning their longhouses. Though their homes were built primarily for survival, the interiors often featured intricate carvings and designs that reflected their cultural identity. From delicate patterns on wooden beams to painted symbols on walls, the longhouse wasn't just a place to escape the cold, it was a place to express their culture and beliefs. These designs were more than just decorative, they were symbolic, representing everything from the Vikings' connection to the gods to their pride in their heritage. Historians still debate how much these decorative elements were tied to Viking religious beliefs. Some argue that the carvings were intended to invoke protection from the gods, while others believe they were simply a reflection of the Vikings' artistic sensibilities. Either way, the idea of art and culture being woven into the very structure of the home speaks to the Vikings' belief that everything down to the smallest detail was interconnected. The longhouse was a microcosm of Viking life, a blend of functionality, artistry, and survival. As the night deepens, you feel the warmth of the longhouse and the weight of history. The fire crackles softly in the hearth. The wind howls outside. But within these walls, there's a sense of peace, a quiet assurance that, despite the chaos outside, this place will endure. The Vikings, with their ingenuity, resilience, and deep understanding of the world around them, built more than just shelters. They built homes that could stand the test of time and the elements. You're standing in the shadow of the longhouse, the swirling snow outside seeming to recede as you step deeper into the warmth of the structure. The fire in the hearth casts a soft glow over the room, and you can feel the familiar comfort of being sheltered from the biting cold. As the wind rattles the roof, you're reminded of the hostile environment outside, but inside, you're safe, cocooned by the resilience of Viking craftsmanship. This protection, this sense of security, was vital for their survival. Yet, the longhouse wasn't just about keeping out the cold, it was a carefully constructed space that catered to every aspect of Viking life, no matter how dire the conditions. The central feature of the longhouse, as you've already seen, was the hearth. It wasn't just a source of heat, it was the lifeblood of the home. Vikings didn't rely on modern stoves or central heating. Their warmth came from a fire burning in the center of the room. The hearth wasn't just for cooking, it was a social and spiritual focal point. At night, families would gather around the fire, their faces illuminated by its flickering flames as they shared stories, sang songs, and bonded over a meal. The hearth was more than just a utility. It was a gathering point that symbolized the community's shared struggle and triumph over the brutal winter. But how did they ensure that the fire stayed lit through the long, cold months? Keeping a fire going in such harsh conditions wasn't as simple as lighting a match and walking away. The Vikings were experts at managing the fire to make sure it provided a constant source of warmth and light. They used a combination of dry wood, animal fat, and even coal to keep the fire burning. This fuel would last longer than traditional wood, burning steadily throughout the night and into the next day. The fire pit itself was constructed with careful thought to both function and safety. A stone ring often surrounded the hearth, designed to contain the flames and prevent sparks from igniting nearby materials. The Vikings were aware of the dangers fire posed, especially in a longhouse constructed of wood and animal hides. Yet they also knew that fire was their most essential resource. It was the key to surviving the long, harsh winters, and the entire structure of the home was designed to funnel heat from the fire throughout the space. As you watch the flames dance and crackle, you can imagine the Viking families of centuries past gathered around the hearth. Their world may have been one of extreme cold and darkness, but inside the longhouse, the warmth of the fire brought them together. The fire was the pulse of Viking life, both physically and spiritually. It not only kept them warm, but also provided light, a sense of security, and even a place for social connection. The importance of the hearth went beyond just warmth and light. It was a source of food, too. The Vikings were a practical people, and they made sure their homes were designed to meet their most basic needs. The longhouse featured a rudimentary cooking area beside the fire, where large cauldrons and iron pots would hang over the flames. Meat, fish, and dairy products were cooked over the fire, filling the room with the comforting smell of stews and broths. But not all food preparation was done at the hearth. The Vikings were also skilled at preserving food for the long winter months, a task that was vital for their survival. They preserved fish, meat, and dairy products using a variety of methods. Smoking, drying, and salting were common techniques, ensuring that food would last through the cold months when fresh provisions were scarce. Viking homes were often filled with the smell of dried fish or cured meats, an unmistakable sign of their resourcefulness and ability to plan for the future. What's truly remarkable about Viking food preservation methods is that they didn't have the luxury of refrigeration. Their methods were incredibly effective, allowing them to store food for months at a time. The Vikings understood the importance of being prepared for the harsh winters when hunting and farming were no longer viable. In a way, their survival relied as much on their ability to store and preserve food as it did on their ability to build shelter. Viking settlements were typically situated near rivers, lakes, or the coast, providing them with an abundance of fish and other aquatic resources. Fishing was a crucial part of Viking life, and the techniques they used to catch and preserve fish were as advanced as their skills in the art of building shelters. Alongside their hunting prowess, the Vikings relied heavily on the sea for sustenance. The variety of fish they could catch, from cod to salmon, provided them with a constant food source throughout the year. Yet, despite the abundance of fish, the Vikings didn't neglect other food sources. They hunted game in the surrounding forests, taking advantage of the wildlife that thrived in their environment. Deer, elk, and even bears were hunted, their meat preserved for the lean months ahead. The Vikings were incredibly skilled hunters, using weapons like the bow and arrow, as well as traps and snares, to catch their prey. Scholars still debate the extent to which Viking diets relied on meat versus other food sources. Some argue that meat and fish made up the bulk of their diet, while others suggest that plant-based foods, such as root vegetables and grains, were equally important. While there is no definitive answer, one thing is clear. The Vikings were adaptable and resourceful, finding ways to make the most of their environment, no matter how harsh the conditions. In addition to food preservation, the Vikings also understood the importance of maintaining their shelter in the winter months. While the longhouse was designed to be sturdy, it still required regular upkeep. Roofs would need to be repaired after heavy snowfalls, and the thatch would need to be replaced periodically. The Vikings worked together as a community to maintain the structures, ensuring that everyone had a safe place to live during the winter months. These maintenance efforts weren't just about practicality, they were also a reflection of Viking social structures. The community worked together to ensure that everyone's needs were met, even in the most challenging conditions. The longhouse was a place of safety, but it was also a place of shared responsibility. Everyone played a part in maintaining the home, ensuring that the fire continued to burn and the food supply remained stocked. The wind howls outside, a constant reminder of the unforgiving nature of the north. But inside the longhouse, the warmth from the hearth provides a soothing contrast. The crackle of the fire is comforting, and you can feel the presence of generations before you who endured these same brutal winters, seeking shelter from the storm. What's truly remarkable about the Viking longhouse isn't just its ability to keep the cold at bay, it's the sheer ingenuity behind it. From the materials used to the way the space was organized, every detail of the longhouse was designed with survival in mind. But even the best-built homes need protection against the worst the weather can throw at them. You can almost feel the weight of the snow accumulating on the roof as you sit back in the warm glow of the fire. With each passing storm, the thick snow would pile up on the roof, adding pressure to the structure. If not managed properly, this could lead to serious damage or even collapse. The Vikings, ever practical, understood this and designed their roofs to cope with these conditions. The steep pitch of the roof wasn't just for aesthetic appeal, it was a functional design that allowed snow to slide off easily. This meant that the weight of the snow wouldn't accumulate to dangerous levels, ensuring that the structure remained intact even during the worst snowstorms. But what about the rest of the structure? How did the Vikings keep the warmth inside, where it was most needed, and prevent the cold from creeping in through the cracks and crevices? You can feel the difference in temperature as you move closer to the walls of the longhouse. The materials used in the construction were essential for insulation, but so was the layout of the home. The Vikings understood the importance of creating a space that would trap heat and minimize the flow of cold air. One of the most effective ways they did this was through the use of a double-walled construction technique. The inner walls of the longhouse were typically made of timber, but between these walls, the Vikings packed a layer of insulation, often made from moss, straw, or animal fur. This added layer of insulation helped keep the cold from seeping in, while also trapping the warmth generated by the hearth. It's a simple but ingenious design that speaks to the Vikings' deep understanding of their environment. The longhouse wasn't just a shelter, it was a carefully designed ecosystem that maximized warmth, safety, and comfort. The layout was crucial in making the most of the available space. As you walk through the longhouse, you notice that the sleeping quarters are situated along the walls, with the central space reserved for the hearth and communal activities. This arrangement ensured that everyone could benefit from the warmth of the fire. Families slept close together, sharing the heat generated by the hearth, making it easier to endure the cold nights. In addition to insulation and the layout, the Vikings also knew the importance of sealing off drafts. Even a small crack in the wall or window could allow cold air to seep in, lowering the temperature inside the home and wasting precious warmth. The Vikings used a combination of natural materials, moss, animal hair, and clay, along with their own ingenuity to fill in any gaps. This attention to detail helped ensure that the longhouse was as airtight as possible, preventing the cold from entering and the heat from escaping. While the Vikings were skilled at building their shelters, they were also resourceful when it came to other aspects of survival. One of the lesser-known ways the Vikings kept warm was through the use of animal pelts, which were often draped over the walls and used as blankets. These furs were thick and insulating, offering an additional layer of warmth on the coldest nights. But these pelts weren't just for warmth, they were also symbolic of the Viking relationship with the natural world. To the Vikings, animals were not just sources of food or materials, they were integral to their survival, and their furs had spiritual significance. As you touch the rough texture of the animal pelts hanging on the walls, it's hard not to feel a sense of respect for the Vikings' connection to the animals they relied on. Their use of furs and hides was a reflection of their understanding of nature, not as something to conquer, but as something to work in harmony with. The warmth provided by these pelts was a reminder of the delicate balance between survival and respect for the natural world. Interestingly, there's an ongoing discussion among historians about how the Vikings viewed their relationship with the animals they hunted. Some scholars argue that animal hunting was a deeply spiritual act, one that connected the Vikings to the gods and to the natural world. Others believe that the Vikings saw animals as more of a resource to be used, rather than as spiritual beings. What's clear, however, is that the Vikings understood the value of the animals they hunted, and they used every part of the animal to ensure their survival. The pelts, meat, bones, and even the sinew were put to use in a variety of ways, from clothing to tools to shelter. The longhouse itself wasn't just about physical protection, it was also a place of emotional and social security. In the face of the harsh winters and constant danger from outside forces, the longhouse was a sanctuary, a place where the family unit could come together to share warmth and resources. The communal nature of the longhouse helped foster a sense of unity and cooperation among the Vikings. It was more than just a shelter from the cold, it was the heart of Viking society, where bonds were formed and strengthened through shared experiences of hardship and survival. As you sit by the fire, you realize that the longhouse was much more than just a building. It was a symbol of Viking resilience, a structure designed not only to survive the harshest of winters, but to provide a space for connection and community. It was a place where families could endure the cold together, where the warmth of the fire wasn't just physical, but emotional and spiritual as well. The Vikings were experts at building homes, but they were also experts at building communities, strong, supportive groups that could face the worst of the north together. You step outside the longhouse once more, the cold immediately biting at your skin, a stark contrast to the warmth you just left behind. The howling wind cuts through the snow, pushing it in all directions, but here, in the shelter of the Viking homestead, you feel safe. These houses weren't just constructed to survive, they were designed to provide a refuge from the worst conditions imaginable. But the Viking commitment to survival didn't end at the threshold of the longhouse, it extended to the community as a whole, to every aspect of life. And when we think about Viking survival, we can't ignore one of their most crucial methods of weathering the storm, their use of natural barriers. Around you, you can see the landscape stretching out, snow-covered hills, frozen lakes, and dense forests all serving as natural fortifications. Vikings lived in a world where nature itself became their protector and provider, and they made use of every feature of the land to keep themselves safe from the bitter cold. For them, survival was as much about understanding and respecting the environment as it was about shelter construction. This connection between Viking settlements and the landscape is one of the unsung elements of their ability to thrive in such a harsh climate. Viking settlements were often strategically located to maximize protection from the elements. They sought out spots that offered natural windbreaks, places where hills, forests, and even bodies of water could shield them from the worst of the winter winds. This was crucial, especially in an environment where the wind could cut through the toughest materials and make the cold feel even more unbearable. By building in these sheltered areas, the Vikings took full advantage of the landscape to protect their homes from the harshest conditions. If you take a moment to look around, imagine how the Vikings would have viewed their surroundings. The dense forests, rich with timber for construction, provided more than just building materials, they also served as a barrier against the freezing winds. The towering trees acted as natural windbreaks, slowing down the chilling gusts that would otherwise strip the warmth from their homes. This natural protection would have been essential for Viking settlements, as they faced extreme cold, unpredictable snowstorms, and winds that could easily drive the temperature down to dangerous levels. Without these natural barriers, survival would have been far more difficult. Historians still debate whether the Vikings always deliberately chose sites based on these natural features or if it was more a matter of trial and error. Some argue that the Vikings were strategic in their settlements, carefully selecting areas based on their environmental knowledge. Others believe that the Vikings simply adapted to whatever land was available, and over time, learned which areas offered the most protection. Either way, what's clear is that the Vikings had a deep understanding of how to use the landscape to their advantage. In addition to the land itself, the Vikings also made use of their surroundings to protect their homes from one of the most dangerous elements of winter, the snow. While the steeply pitched roofs allowed snow to slide off, the Vikings also built their homes in a way that took advantage of the snow itself. In some areas, they built their homes into the sides of hills or used natural mounds of snow to provide additional insulation. By burying part of the longhouse into the earth or snow, they reduced the amount of exposure to the cold air, essentially turning the earth itself into a natural insulator. The snow, which could otherwise be a destructive force, became a vital component in the Viking survival strategy. The use of these natural elements extended beyond just protection from the cold. The Vikings were also experts at using the land for their food sources. The forests surrounding their settlements provided them with a steady supply of game, such as deer and wild boar, while the rivers and lakes offered abundant fish. These resources were critical to their survival, especially during the long winters when hunting and fishing were often the only means of obtaining fresh food. By strategically locating their settlements near these resources, The Vikings ensured that they would have access to food even when the snow made travel difficult. It's fascinating to think about how the Vikings utilized the world around them. Their homes were not just built from the materials they harvested, they were constructed in such a way that they harmonized with the environment. The placement of their settlements was just as important as the materials used to build them, showing a deep understanding of how to live in balance with nature rather than fighting against it. But Viking settlements weren't just about physical survival. The design of these homes, the way they were situated, and the role of the community within them all reflect something deeper: the Viking belief in resilience. The longhouse was more than just a place to sleep. It was a symbol of strength, not just physically, but in spirit as well. For the Vikings, the longhouse was a place where they could come together, huddle against the cold, and find warmth not only in the fire, but in each other. It was a place where families worked, ate, and lived together, drawing strength from the shared experience of surviving the cold. The emotional and social aspects of Viking life were just as important as their physical survival. The longhouse, as a communal space, allowed people to come together to share stories, pass down traditions, and, most importantly, keep their spirits up during the long, dark months. It was in these moments of community that the Vikings found strength. While the cold outside might have been enough to drive people into isolation, the Viking longhouse, designed for warmth, comfort, and connection, did the opposite. It brought them closer together. It's interesting how, even with all the innovations in Viking construction, their ultimate survival came down to the bonds they shared. It wasn't just about keeping the cold out, it was about keeping the warmth in, not just physically, but emotionally. In many ways, the Viking longhouse was the embodiment of their survival philosophy: strength through unity, resilience through shared experience. As the fire continues to crackle and the wind howls outside, you can almost hear the voices of the past, the Vikings who lived, loved, and endured in these very longhouses, their homes and their communities, keeping them safe through the bitter cold. They knew that to survive, they couldn't do it alone. They had to come together and use every tool at their disposal, from the design of their homes to the natural barriers of the land, to endure the harshest winters. The night deepens as the cold outside intensifies, but the warmth inside the longhouse seems even more inviting. The fire in the hearth crackles merrily, casting long, flickering shadows on the walls adorned with animal hides. The longhouse stands resilient, its low profile and thick walls holding steady against the fierce winter storm. You can imagine the Vikings, many of them accustomed to this harsh reality, finding solace here. It wasn't just a shelter from the cold, it was a cornerstone of their entire way of life, where survival wasn't just a matter of endurance, but a reflection of their connection to the land, their people, and their values. The role of the Viking longhouse was as much social as it was physical. The structure itself was a manifestation of Viking resilience, designed to weather both the extreme cold and the harshness of daily life. But perhaps even more impressive was how it functioned as a place of unity. In the longhouse, Viking families and communities gathered, not just to sleep and eat, but to share stories, make decisions, and strengthen bonds that were vital for survival. The design of the longhouse was crucial to this sense of community. While the Vikings were a fiercely independent people, they also knew that survival in the north required cooperation. The longhouse was built to foster this sense of togetherness. The layout of the home was not just functional but purposeful, with spaces organized to encourage communal living. The central hearth, as you've already noticed, was the heart of the longhouse, both literally and figuratively. It was the place where families would gather, share their day's experiences, and bond over a warm meal. This communal aspect of Viking life wasn't just about practicality, it was about survival, in every sense of the word. When you think of Viking society, you might picture warriors and explorers, but it was also a society built on cooperation. In times of crisis, it was the bonds between family members and between neighbors that provided the emotional strength needed to endure. The longhouse was a tangible representation of this value, a shared space where the collective spirit was as crucial as the physical structure that kept out the cold. While the longhouse provided shelter from the elements, it also protected the community from more than just physical threats. Viking society was one in which shared resources were essential, and the longhouse was the center of this exchange. The hearth was not just a symbol of warmth, but of the shared resources that sustained the community. From food to tools, the longhouse housed everything the Vikings needed to survive the brutal winters. The storage areas of the longhouse were often filled with dried meats, fish, and grain essential supplies that ensured the people could make it through the months of snow and ice. Scholars still debate the extent to which Vikings depended on a barter system versus a more formalized economy, but what's clear is that they valued communal living and resource sharing. Each longhouse was a microcosm of Viking society where everything, from food to warmth, was shared among the people. In such an environment, survival wasn't just about individual strength, it was about the collective strength of the community. Everyone contributed, and everyone benefited from the resources of the household. But the Viking longhouse was also a place where social roles were defined. Though everyone had a part to play in ensuring the survival of the community, the roles were not always equal. The Viking society was hierarchical, with clear distinctions between leaders and followers, warriors and farmers, men and women. The longhouse reflected this. The seating arrangements around the hearth, for example, would often indicate status. The head of the household, the most respected members of the community, would sit closest to the fire, while the others would sit further away. The way in which space was organized spoke to the power dynamics at play within the Viking home. Despite this hierarchy, the longhouse still functioned as a space for communal decision-making. The hearth wasn't just a place for meals, it was where major decisions were made, where disputes were settled, and where future plans were discussed. The warm glow of the fire would have illuminated not just faces, but ideas and philosophies as well. It's easy to imagine a council of elders seated around the hearth, discussing the future of the settlement while younger members of the community listened attentively, learning from the wisdom of their elders. The communal nature of Viking life ensured that even though some held more power than others, the community as a whole was essential for survival. This reliance on communal living went beyond the walls of the longhouse and extended into the wider Viking society. The Vikings' ability to form tight-knit communities was key to their success in the harsh northern world. The longhouse was a symbol of this cooperation, but it was also a practical necessity. Families, neighbors, and extended kin worked together to ensure everyone was provided for. In such a harsh environment, isolation could be deadly. The Vikings understood that the more they shared, the stronger they became. As you sit by the fire, the warmth and the light filling the space around you, consider how the Viking longhouse was more than just a physical structure. It was the heart of a social system that emphasized cooperation, respect for the environment, and resilience in the face of adversity. The longhouse was not just a place of survival, it was a space that encouraged a shared sense of purpose, a shared understanding that everyone, no matter their role, contributed to the community's well-being. There's something inherently comforting about the thought of a Viking family huddled together, the heat from the hearth keeping the cold at bay as they share stories of their ancestors, of battles fought, and of long journeys across the sea. The longhouse wasn't just a place to survive the winter, it was a place to connect with others, to pass down traditions, and to keep the Viking spirit alive. The warmth of the fire wasn't just physical, it was emotional, a reminder that no matter how fierce the storm outside, inside the longhouse, the Vikings were always stronger together. As you sit in the peaceful glow of the hearth, you feel that connection to the past. The Vikings, with all their strength, their bravery, and their ingenuity, didn't just survive the cold, they found ways to thrive in it. The longhouse was their fortress, not just against the elements, but against the hardships of life. And as the wind howls outside, you know that this resilient community, bound together by the warmth of the fire, would face whatever came next, united as one. The fire crackles softly, its warmth enveloping you as you sink deeper into the Viking longhouse, feeling the embrace of its walls. You hear the wind howling outside, but here, in the heart of the longhouse, the elements feel distant, almost irrelevant. The structure around you is not just a product of the Vikings' ingenuity, it's a representation of their connection to the world, both natural and spiritual. The longhouse was, after all, more than just a physical shelter. It was a space where the Vikings found meaning, purpose, and a sense of belonging, especially in the harsh winter months when the outside world seemed so dangerous. As the fire crackles, you can imagine the flickering shadows playing across the wooden beams, the intricately carved symbols etched into the walls, each one a reminder of the gods, the ancestors, or the Vikings' connection to nature. It's no surprise that for a people whose survival was so closely tied to the land, the longhouse also served as a place of spiritual significance. For the Vikings, the longhouse was sacred, a place where the spiritual and the physical intertwined. The central hearth was not just a source of warmth and light, it was also a sacred spot. In Viking culture, the hearth was considered a link to the divine. It was believed that the fire was a gift from the gods, a symbol of life and protection. Just as the fire warmed the body, it also symbolized the warmth of the gods' favor, offering protection from the cold and darkness that surrounded the Viking world. The hearth was often the focal point during religious rituals, where offerings were made to the gods and prayers were said for the health and safety of the family and community. The fire wasn't just about survival, it was about spiritual sustenance as well. Scholars still debate how central the idea of spiritual warmth was to Viking architecture. Some argue that the hearth's sacred significance was not just a symbolic gesture, but a vital part of the Vikings' daily life and survival. For them, the act of lighting the fire, maintaining it, and gathering around it was as much a spiritual practice as a physical necessity. Others believe that while the fire was important, its primary function was simply practical, keeping the cold at bay and providing light during the long, dark nights. However, no matter where scholars land on this debate, one thing is clear. The fire was the beating heart of the longhouse, not only physically, but spiritually as well. Beyond the hearth, the Viking longhouse was often filled with religious symbols and artifacts. If you were to walk through the longhouse, you might notice small altars dedicated to the gods, perhaps with offerings of food, drink, or tools placed on them as a sign of respect. The Vikings believed that their gods such as Odin, Thor, and Freya watched over them, providing protection and blessings. These altars, often located near the hearth or in prominent areas of the longhouse, were central to the Vikings' way of life. They were places of reflection, where families could honor their gods and ask for their guidance through the cold, dark winter months. Interestingly, there are many debates among historians and archaeologists about how these rituals were performed in everyday Viking life. Some suggest that the religious practices of the Vikings were deeply integrated into their homes and everyday actions. The longhouse, in this view, wasn't just a home but also a temple where the boundaries between the physical world and the spiritual world were blurred. Others suggest that while the Vikings did revere their gods, these rituals were likely more ceremonial and took place outside the longhouse in designated areas, such as sacred groves or outdoor altars. Regardless of the specifics, the presence of spiritual practices within the longhouse points to the deep intertwining of Viking life with the forces of nature, both seen and unseen. The Vikings' reliance on the land wasn't just about surviving the physical environment, it was also about respecting the rhythms of nature. They understood that their survival depended on more than just their ingenuity. It also depended on the careful observation of the world around them. The changing of the seasons, the movement of animals, the behavior of the sea, all of these were seen as signs and omens that guided Viking decision-making. The longhouse, with its hearth at the center, was where the Vikings could come together to reflect on the seasons and what they had learned from the land. The Vikings also looked to the skies for guidance. The northern lights, or aurora borealis, were a spectacular phenomenon that many believed was a sign from the gods. When the glowing colors of the aurora filled the sky, it was a moment of awe and reverence. To the Vikings, the lights weren't just a natural wonder. They were a reminder of the divine presence that guided them through the darkest months. It's easy to imagine the Vikings, sitting around their hearths, looking out at the sky and finding solace in the flickering colors, knowing that the gods were watching over them, keeping them safe from the cold and darkness. It's also fascinating to think about the role of the Viking longhouse in the broader community. While the longhouse was primarily a family unit, many Viking settlements were built with the intention of being self-sustaining. Entire villages could live in clusters of longhouses where resources like food, firewood, and materials for repairs were shared. The Vikings understood the importance of cooperation in their small communities, and the longhouses were designed to ensure that everyone played a part in ensuring the survival of the group. In times of hardship, it was the community that kept the spirits high and the fire burning. Whether it was the cold winter nights or a season of poor crops, the longhouse acted as a sanctuary for the Viking people. It wasn't just a physical space, it was a place where the strength of the community was reinforced. The Vikings were not isolated. They were part of a tightly knit web of relationships, and it was within the longhouse that these relationships were forged and maintained. As the wind rages outside, you begin to appreciate just how much the Viking longhouse meant to them. It wasn't just shelter, it was the essence of their survival. The warmth of the fire, the protection of the walls, the sense of community, it all combined to make the longhouse a powerful symbol of Viking life. It was their fortress against the elements, a place where they found not just physical warmth, but emotional and spiritual warmth as well. It was a place where families gathered, where stories were passed down, where the gods were honored, and where survival was a shared endeavor. The Vikings, in their ingenuity and resilience, created homes that didn't just withstand the cold, they thrived in it. Their longhouses, carefully crafted and thoughtfully designed, were not just a refuge from the winter, they were a symbol of the Viking spirit, strong and enduring in the face of the harshest conditions. The storm continues to rage outside, but inside the longhouse, you feel the calm. The fire has settled into a steady, warm glow, its embers reflecting the harsh reality of the world outside, but contrasting it with a sense of security. The walls of the longhouse, thick and sturdy, have held firm through countless storms. With each gust of wind, you can feel the longhouse's resilience. It's as if the building itself understands the weight of the winter and remains unshaken by the fury of nature. This feeling of invulnerability was something the Vikings prized deeply. They built homes and entire lives around the idea of defiance, not against the elements themselves, but the fear that the elements could overwhelm them. Viking longhouses were designed with more than just the cold in mind. They were created to provide safety, a sense of community, and protection from forces beyond their control. The storms, the predators of the forest, and even their enemies, the Vikings, had to face these things every single day. But despite the harsh environment, the longhouse, as well as the people within it, were built to endure. The strength and unity of the Viking community were embedded in the walls themselves, just as much as in the hearts of those who gathered around the fire. You may wonder, though, why such careful attention was given to the home's construction and layout. The answer lies in the fact that the Vikings didn't just live in these homes, they thrived in them. Survival wasn't only about avoiding death, it was about finding a sense of purpose in the process. The longhouse wasn't just a refuge from the cold, it was the foundation of their identity. Everything within it, from the position of the hearth to the materials used to construct the walls, spoke of a culture shaped by resilience, adaptability, and unity. It's fascinating to think about how the longhouse reflected the very nature of Viking life itself. The walls may have been solid, but the roof was flexible, steeply pitched to allow the snow to fall off without gathering and causing damage. The longhouse was a combination of elements working together in harmony. The strength of the timber, the flexibility of the roof, the insulation of the moss and hides. It was a home built to withstand whatever the land could throw at it: storms, snow, and even the frigid cold of the north. Historians often point to the Vikings' ability to adapt their building methods to local conditions as a major factor in their success. The Vikings, known for their exploration and seafaring prowess, were no strangers to adapting to new environments. But even in the harsh northern climates, their building techniques remained effective across generations. What's intriguing is the degree to which these homes were a blend of both pragmatism and symbolism. The materials chosen for the longhouse weren't just functional, they were also representative of the Viking view of the world. Timber, stone, and animal hides all had spiritual significance in their culture. Wood, for example, was sacred to many northern tribes. It was the material of life, representing the link between the gods and the earth. When Vikings constructed their homes, they didn't just see them as physical shelters, they saw them as a reflection of their relationship with the land, with nature, and with the divine. The hearth at the center of the longhouse wasn't just a place to cook, it was a sacred space, where offerings to the gods might be made, and where the family's ancestors were honored. Scholars still debate how much spiritual significance the Vikings placed on their homes. Some argue that these structures, while undoubtedly practical, were also deeply symbolic, acting as a conduit between the physical world and the spiritual realm. Others believe that the Vikings were purely pragmatic in their approach, viewing their homes as functional spaces rather than spiritual sanctuaries. However, what is clear is that the longhouse was much more than a mere shelter. It was a place where the Vikings found strength and connection, both to the land they lived on and to each other. As you sit by the fire, you can almost hear the sounds of the longhouse filling with life. The crackle of the flames, the murmur of voices, the laughter of children, the rustle of furs, and the clink of cups raised in a toast to another day survived. The longhouse was more than a house, it was a living, breathing space, filled with the warmth of the people who lived there. And this warmth was not just a physical sensation, it was a feeling that permeated every aspect of their lives, making the longhouse a home, not just a shelter. In a place where the elements could quickly turn deadly, the Vikings learned to build homes that were more than just practical shelters. They were sanctuaries of life, warmth, and connection. They were symbols of survival and resilience in a world that often seemed indifferent to human life. The longhouse, with its thick walls, steep roof, and central hearth, provided protection from the cold. But more than that, it created a space for community, for strength, and for shared survival. But what made these homes truly remarkable was not just their ability to withstand the elements, it was the way they represented the very spirit of the Viking people. These were homes built not just to survive but to thrive in the face of adversity. The longhouse stood as a testament to their ability to adapt to the harshest environments, and to live not just to exist, but to connect, to grow, and to celebrate life. The strength of Viking society wasn't just in their warriors or explorers, it was in their communities, their families, and their ability to adapt to the challenges of their world. The longhouse, the very structure that protected them from the cold, was also a symbol of the strength of that community. It was in these homes that the Vikings found the fortitude to endure, to overcome, and to continue their journey in a world that was often merciless. So, as the fire continues to burn and the storm rages outside, take a moment to reflect on the incredible resilience of the Viking people. The longhouse wasn't just a building, it was a sanctuary, a symbol of unity, and a reminder that, no matter how fierce the winter or how bitter the storm, together, the Vikings would always endure. The cold wind outside rages on, yet within the warmth of the longhouse, a sense of tranquility persists. The fire crackles steadily in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls lined with animal hides. You settle into the corner of the room, feeling the steady comfort of the space around you. Here, in this small, self-contained world, the Vikings found not just shelter but also solace. The longhouse was their sanctuary, a place where the family unit could come together to fight against the isolation of the frigid winters. But just how did these homes foster such a strong sense of community? How did these humble shelters help keep the bonds of Viking society strong in the face of adversity? Looking around the longhouse, you can see that every element of the structure speaks to the importance of community and togetherness. The layout, the placement of the hearth, and even the way the space is divided, all suggest that the Vikings knew that survival in the harsh northern world wasn't just about individual endurance, it was about collective strength. The Viking longhouse wasn't merely a place to sleep, it was a gathering space, a center of activity, and the nucleus of family life. At the heart of this communal life was the hearth. It wasn't just a fire for cooking, it was the place where everyone came together to share warmth, food, and conversation. The hearth was, in many ways, the beating heart of Viking social life. After long days of battling the elements, working in the fields, or hunting in the forests, the Vikings would gather around the hearth to rest and renew their bonds. This communal gathering was as much about emotional nourishment as it was about physical warmth. In the evenings, as the winds howled and the snow piled up outside, the family would come together around the hearth, sharing stories of the day, recounting the tales of ancestors and heroes, and passing down wisdom from generation to generation. The hearth was where traditions were kept alive, and where the family would reconnect after a day spent apart. It was the pulse of Viking family life, the place where bonds were formed, nurtured, and strengthened. The design of the longhouse itself reflects the communal nature of Viking life. The open space allowed for interaction and unity, rather than isolation. In contrast to modern homes, where individual rooms separate family members, the Viking longhouse invited togetherness. It's easy to imagine a Viking family, after a day's work, coming together in the shared warmth of the fire. They would sleep near one another, close enough to feel the shared warmth and the unspoken strength of their connections. In this space, warmth wasn't just provided by the hearth, it was also provided by the closeness of the family, the unity of their spirits. The Viking longhouse wasn't just a shelter for the family, it was a reflection of their deep values. The structure of the home mirrored the social values of Viking society. The communal nature of the longhouse reflected the importance of kinship, family, and loyalty in Viking culture. The Vikings believed that survival came not just from strength of arms, but from strength in numbers. The unity of the family, the bonds forged around the hearth, were integral to their survival. Yet, the Viking longhouse also served a more practical function. It was, after all, a shelter from the dangers of the outside world. The cold was not the only threat the Vikings faced. There were also wild animals to contend with and, at times, even enemy raids. The longhouse, with its solid timber frame and thick walls, was designed to withstand not only the cold but also potential attacks. It was a fortress as much as it was a home. The Vikings, ever practical, designed their homes to offer safety from both nature and human threats. What's remarkable about the Viking approach to shelter, though, is the emphasis on shared protection. A Viking home wasn't just a private space, it was part of a larger network of homes that worked together to create a stronger, more unified community. Villages were often built with interconnected homes, allowing for better defense against both the elements and invaders. In the event of an attack, neighbors could easily come to each other's aid, forming a collective defense. The longhouse was a symbol of the Viking belief in the importance of working together for mutual survival. There is also something deeply poetic about how the Vikings' physical homes mirrored their spiritual worldview. The longhouse wasn't just a structure of wood and thatch, it was a symbol of their connection to the earth, to their ancestors, and to the divine. The Vikings saw the world around them as alive with meaning, and their homes reflected this view. From the careful placement of the hearth to the use of animal skins and wood in the structure, everything in the longhouse had symbolic value. The Viking longhouse was a microcosm of the Viking relationship with the world. It was a place of protection, warmth, and shared life, where survival was a collective effort and where the bonds of kinship, both human and spiritual, were honored and nurtured. For the Vikings, their connection to the natural world wasn't just about survival, it was a spiritual bond that was reflected in every aspect of their lives, including the construction of their homes. As you sit by the fire, you begin to understand how the longhouse served not only as shelter but also as a place where the Vikings could reflect on their place in the world. The hearth wasn't just a source of warmth, it was a connection to the divine, a reminder that the gods watched over them, providing protection and guidance as they navigated the challenges of the north. The longhouse was also a place where the community could come together to honor their gods through rituals and offerings made at the hearth or in other sacred spaces within the home. These rituals, whether private or communal, were an important part of Viking life. They were a way to strengthen their connection to the divine and to ensure the continued protection of the family and the settlement. It's easy to imagine the Viking family gathered around the hearth, offering a sacrifice of food or drink, asking for favor and protection in the months ahead. This practice was an acknowledgement that, even with all their ingenuity and resourcefulness, the Vikings understood that their survival ultimately relied on forces beyond their control. It's remarkable how the Viking longhouse was not just a home, but a reflection of the Viking worldview, a world where the physical, emotional, and spiritual aspects of life were intertwined. The longhouse wasn't just a place to escape the cold, it was a place to honor the past, celebrate the present, and ensure a future. It was a sanctuary, both in the physical sense and in a deeply spiritual way. The Viking longhouse, with its thick timber walls, steep roof, and central hearth, stands as a testament to their resilience, their unity, and their belief in the importance of both community and connection to the natural world. The storm continues to roar outside, but within the walls of the longhouse you feel a quiet calm. The warmth from the hearth embraces you, the gentle flicker of firelight casting its glow on the animal skins that line the walls. You're safe here, protected not just by the sturdy timbers of the longhouse, but by the collective strength of the Viking spirit. The longhouse is more than a shelter. It's a symbol of the Viking way of life, their ability to adapt, to survive, and to thrive in the harshest of conditions. It is a fortress of warmth and community, a space where the Vikings could endure the cold, the darkness, and the trials of winter. But the longhouse wasn't just about surviving the physical elements, it was also about preserving their way of life, their traditions, and their beliefs. The Vikings, despite their fierce reputation as warriors and explorers, had a deeply spiritual connection to their homes. The longhouse, as a reflection of their society, was designed not only for protection, but for the continuity of their cultural identity. It was a space where history was passed down, where songs were sung, and where the values of the past were woven into the fabric of daily life. Think about the way the Vikings would gather around the hearth after a long day, the crackling fire providing both light and warmth. The fire, with its comforting glow, became the heart of their world. As the flames danced, families would share stories, legends of gods and heroes, tales of battles fought and voyages across the seas. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were the lifeblood of Viking culture, a way of passing down wisdom, values, and history to the next generation. In the flickering light of the hearth, the past and present coexisted, reminding everyone of their place in the world. The hearth was where the Vikings connected to their ancestors and the gods they revered. It was the sacred space of the home, where offerings were made to ensure the well-being of the family and the protection of the gods. Every Viking knew that their survival was tied not only to their own strength and cunning but to the favor of the divine. By keeping the hearth alive and tended, they honored the gods, asking for their blessings to see them through the long, dark winter. As you imagine the vibrant life within these longhouses, it's hard not to feel the weight of history and belief that permeated these structures. The Vikings didn't just build to survive, they built to live, to connect, and to honor. The longhouse was more than a functional space. It was a physical embodiment of the Vikings' worldview, where every beam, every stone, Every piece of animal hide had purpose and meaning. The design was rooted in a deep understanding of their environment, but it was also a reflection of their spiritual and social needs. Even the smallest details of the longhouse had significance. The animal hides on the walls weren't just there for insulation, they were a tribute to the animals that provided sustenance and warmth. The materials used to build the home weren't chosen at random. They were a direct result of the Vikings' respect for the land and the creatures that lived on it. They didn't see nature as something to conquer, but something to work with, to honor. The animals whose hides lined the walls weren't just resources, they were part of the family's survival and part of the spiritual world the Vikings inhabited. There's a fascinating debate among scholars about the spiritual beliefs of the Vikings, particularly regarding the role of their homes in these practices. Some historians argue that the longhouse itself was seen as a kind of temple, a sacred space where the gods could be honored in daily life. Others believe that while the Vikings certainly revered the gods, their homes were more pragmatic, built primarily for survival. Regardless of the specifics, it's clear that the Vikings' relationship to their environment was deeply intertwined with their spiritual practices. The longhouse wasn't just a place to sleep, it was a reflection of their connection to the earth, to the animals they relied on, and to the gods they worshipped. The Viking longhouse, with its low profile, steep roof, and communal space, also spoke to their understanding of society. The longhouse wasn't built for isolation, it was built for unity. The Vikings knew that survival in the north required cooperation. The shared hearth, the close proximity of families, the shared space, it all reinforced the idea that no one could survive alone. The longhouse was not just a family home, it was a community hub, where people gathered to share resources, knowledge, and stories. The warmth of the fire wasn't just for physical comfort, it was a symbol of the bonds that held the community together. The close-knit nature of Viking society extended beyond the walls of the longhouse. It was reflected in their social structures, their rituals, and their collective efforts to protect their families and their villages. The Vikings understood that strength didn't just come from individual warriors or leaders, it came from the unity of the people. Each person, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, played a role in the survival of the group. The longhouse, as the heart of the settlement, was a constant reminder of that interconnectedness. The Vikings, in many ways, lived their lives in cycles of seasons, of generations, and of stories. As the longhouse stood resilient against the winds and the snow, so too did the stories of their ancestors. The Vikings weren't just living in the present, they were carrying the past with them, ensuring that their cultural identity, their values, and their traditions would endure for generations to come. The longhouse wasn't just a shelter from the storm, it was a vessel for the spirit of the Vikings, a place where history was kept alive, where warmth and connection transcended the cold and isolation of winter. You sit back, feeling the warmth of the fire and the weight of history. The Vikings, with all their ingenuity and resilience, built more than homes. They built sanctuaries, places where survival was not just about the body but about the soul. The longhouse, with its smoke-filled air, its wooden beams, and its communal hearth, stood as a symbol of everything the Vikings held dear: unity, resilience, and the belief that, no matter how fierce the storm, together they could weather anything. The night is silent now, save for the soft crackling of the fire. The storm outside has subsided, leaving a stillness that contrasts the fury of earlier. Inside the longhouse, the warmth of the fire continues to wrap around you, a steady reminder of the resilience built into the very fabric of Viking life. The longhouse, though not grand in its design, stands as a testament to the survival instincts of the Vikings, a people who, despite the relentless cold and challenges of their environment, were able to create a place of refuge, unity, and cultural strength. The longhouse was not just a physical structure, but a symbol of the Viking relationship with nature. They were masters of adaptation, understanding their environment in ways that many other societies of the time could not. The very act of building a shelter capable of withstanding the harsh northern winters speaks to a profound connection with the land. The Vikings didn't just live in the north, they thrived there. Their homes were designed not only to survive the elements, but to work with them. The slanted roofs, designed to shed snow, the thick walls that kept out the cold, and the fire that brought warmth and light were all reflections of the Viking ability to observe, adapt, and persevere. But how did this adaptation extend beyond just the construction of their homes? How did the Viking mindset, so closely tied to survival and endurance, affect the way they lived, worked, and interacted with their world? The answer lies in their understanding of the seasons, their respect for the natural cycles of life, and the importance of community. The longhouse itself was built around the rhythms of Viking life. While the winter months could be brutal, the Vikings didn't retreat into isolation. They used the longhouse as a hub for activity, a place where family members could come together to weather the storm, literally and figuratively. The cold winter months were often a time for reflection, storytelling, and preparation for the warmer seasons when the land would provide them with food and resources. The longhouse was a place where the past, present, and future were intertwined. It wasn't just about surviving the winter, it was about ensuring that the community would be ready for the challenges of the next season. There is something profoundly humbling about the way the Vikings managed to create these homes in such harsh conditions. They didn't have the technology we take for granted today, but they had something more, a deep connection to the world around them, a keen understanding of their environment, and a belief that they could adapt to anything life threw at them. The longhouse wasn't just a refuge from the cold, it was a statement of Viking resilience, a declaration that they could endure, no matter how harsh the conditions. As you reflect on the longhouse, it's clear that the Viking people were not just survivors, they were innovators. The structure of the longhouse, with its careful use of wood, moss, animal skins, and stone, was a brilliant example of their resourcefulness. The Vikings knew that every resource mattered, and they used what was available to them to craft homes that were both practical and enduring. It's easy to imagine how every piece of timber, every strip of hide, was considered carefully in the construction process. The longhouse was, in many ways, a puzzle, with every element fitting together to create a safe, warm space for the people inside. The hearth at the center of the longhouse was the focal point of their survival strategy. Not only did it provide warmth, but it also served as a social and spiritual center. The Vikings believed that fire was a gift from the gods, and the hearth was where they honored that gift. The fire wasn't just a practical necessity, it was also a symbol of life and protection. It was the heart of the home, bringing warmth, light, and a sense of togetherness to the family. As long as the fire burned, they knew they would endure. Interestingly, the role of the hearth in Viking homes was not only about warmth, but also about maintaining the health of the family. In the closed quarters of the longhouse, with many people living and sleeping in close proximity, the fire was also a purifier, helping to clear the air and keep away pests. The Vikings knew the importance of maintaining a clean, healthy environment, especially in the winter when diseases could spread more easily. The hearth was their tool for both comfort and survival. But the longhouse was not just a space for the family to endure the winter, it was a place where the family's social life took place. The shared space allowed for interaction, connection, and mutual support. Whether they were gathering around the hearth to share a meal, telling stories of the gods and ancestors, or simply resting after a hard day's work, the longhouse was the place where the community came together. This shared living arrangement helped to foster a sense of unity and mutual dependence, which was essential for survival in such a harsh environment. Historians still debate the level of social hierarchy within Viking homes. Some argue that the longhouse was a place where the family unit operated with strict roles, with the head of the household taking command and others following suit. However, others suggest that Viking society, while hierarchical, also placed a significant emphasis on collective effort and community. The longhouse, in this sense, may have been a reflection of the Viking belief in cooperation, where everyone had a part to play in ensuring the well-being of the group. The warmth of the fire, the closeness of family members, and the shared space all contributed to the collective strength of the community. It's intriguing to think about how the longhouse, despite its simplicity, served so many purposes. It was a home, a sanctuary, a spiritual center, and a gathering place for the community. It was a place of warmth, safety, and connection, and it symbolized everything that the Vikings valued: strength, unity, resilience, and an unwavering belief in their ability to survive. As the fire burns down to embers and the night deepens, you are left with a sense of awe for the Vikings and the homes they built. In the face of the harshest conditions, they crafted not just shelters, but places of life, warmth, and connection. The longhouse, with its timber frame and central hearth, stands as a testament to the Viking spirit, one that was not only about surviving the cold, but about thriving in it, drawing strength from the land, from each other, and from the gods they revered. As the wind continues to howl outside, you can feel the quiet within the longhouse growing deeper. The fire now has settled into a bed of glowing embers, casting a soft, golden hue across the walls. In the stillness, you can almost hear the faint echoes of past generations, the lives lived in these very spaces, Vikings who, despite the formidable odds of nature, created homes where survival was not just possible, but a testament to their spirit. The longhouse was the heart of their world, where every day they fought not only against the cold, but against the isolation and harshness that the wilderness imposed. It's easy to imagine the Vikings as a people hardened by the elements, warriors, raiders, and explorers who thrived on conflict and conquest. But the longhouse tells a different story, one of cooperation, familial bonds, and the ability to live in harmony with the land. The Viking home wasn't just a place to sleep or eat. It was a space where the Vikings could reflect, connect with each other, and even find solace in the midst of a brutal world. Every element of the longhouse was crafted to bring people together. The space was open and flexible, designed to encourage interaction and togetherness. Viking society placed great value on kinship and unity, and the longhouse reflected this. The hearth was not just a source of warmth, but also the space where the community gathered, where relationships were solidified, and where important decisions were made. The fires that burned brightly through the cold nights were symbolic of the warmth that existed between family members and neighbors, a reminder that the strength of the group was greater than that of any individual. The longhouse, in this sense, was a microcosm of Viking society. The structure and layout of the home were designed to foster the communal spirit that defined their way of life. The Vikings knew that survival wasn't just about physical strength, it was about the strength of the bonds they shared, the unity they maintained, and the willingness to support each other, even when the world around them seemed determined to break them. In their homes, they found not only protection from the elements, but also the emotional and social warmth that helped them endure the darkest and coldest nights. It is in this very space that Viking values were passed down through generations. The longhouse wasn't just a shelter, it was a place where stories were told, legends were woven into the fabric of daily life, and the future was shaped by the lessons of the past. Around the fire, the Viking children would listen to their elders, learning about their ancestors, their gods, and the heroes who walked before them. It was here, in these intimate moments, that the Viking identity was forged, a shared heritage of bravery, resilience, and a deep connection to their community. As you sit by the dying fire, you realize how much the Vikings' survival relied not only on their ingenuity in construction, but on their ability to build strong, supportive communities. The longhouse was more than a shelter, it was a safe haven, a place to foster the ties that bound them together. The Vikings understood that they couldn't face the world alone. They had to work together, support each other, and share the weight of survival. Interestingly, the communal nature of the Viking longhouse also speaks to the way they viewed the world around them. The harsh winters of the north could drive people into isolation, but the Vikings found a way to turn that isolation into strength. The cold, the snow, and the blizzards that could have broken them instead became a backdrop for their unity. Together, they weathered the storms, both literal and figurative, and came out stronger for it. The longhouse was a place where the Viking ethos of strength through unity was embodied in every beam and every stone. Historians have often noted how the Viking worldview was closely tied to their environment. They saw nature not as something to conquer, but as something to respect and live in balance with. The longhouse itself was a reflection of this mindset. The materials used to build the homes were sourced from the natural world, and the design of the longhouse took into account not just the elements, but the way the Vikings could live in harmony with those elements. The steep roofs, designed to shed snow, the thick walls to block the wind, and the central hearth that provided both heat and light, each part of the longhouse was a testament to their understanding of how to live within the rhythms of nature. There's a quiet reverence in how the Vikings approached their homes. The longhouse wasn't simply a shelter, it was a space that honored the land, the animals, and the natural forces that governed their world. Every part of the house, from the timber beams to the animal hides used for insulation, was an extension of their respect for nature. This deep connection to the earth, to the animals they hunted and domesticated, and to the elements they battled each day, defined the Viking spirit. The role of the longhouse in Viking society was also deeply connected to their belief in fate and the gods. The Vikings believed that their lives were guided by a combination of their own actions and the will of the gods. The hearth, as the central point of the longhouse, wasn't just a source of warmth, it was also a space for honoring the divine. The rituals and offerings made at the hearth were a way for the Vikings to acknowledge their dependence on the gods and to ask for their protection. The fire was more than a physical necessity, it was a spiritual one as well. It's amazing to think how the Vikings, living in such a challenging and dangerous environment, managed to thrive not just as individuals, but as communities bound together by their shared values. The longhouse wasn't just a structure, it was the center of Viking life, where family and community came together to ensure survival, protect each other, and honor their connection to the divine. As the embers of the fire fade and the wind outside begins to quiet, the Viking longhouse stands in the stillness of the night, a symbol of endurance, strength, and unity. The lessons learned within its walls echo across the centuries, reminding us that survival is not just about surviving the elements, but about building the connections and bonds that keep us strong, even when the world around us feels like it's falling apart. The storm outside has passed, leaving a calmness in its wake. The night is still, the air sharp and clear as the cold moonlight pours through the small gaps in the roof. But inside the longhouse, the warmth of the hearth continues to spread, a comforting reminder that in this humble shelter, life thrives even in the harshest of winters. The embers crackle softly, the only sound in the stillness as you reflect on everything the Viking longhouse represents. It wasn't just a refuge from the physical cold, it was a reflection of the Vikings' deep understanding of survival, community, and resilience. The longhouse stood as more than just a physical structure. It was the heart of Viking life. It was a symbol of their ability to adapt to the environment and work together to ensure survival. Yet it was also a place where the spirit of the Viking people came alive through the warmth of the fire, the shared stories, and the collective effort of each family member working toward the common goal of enduring the harsh seasons. This was no mere shelter. It was a space imbued with meaning. The central hearth wasn't just for heat, it was a focal point where families could come together, strengthening the bonds that were vital for their survival. There, gathered around the fire, they would share meals, tell stories, and celebrate their survival in a world that seemed to offer nothing but challenges. For the Vikings, the hearth was a place of renewal, where the fire itself symbolized both the life-giving warmth of the earth and the fire of their own enduring spirit. The longhouse's design also revealed how the Vikings' relationship with their environment shaped their everyday lives. Their homes were crafted with a deep respect for the land. The use of local materials, such as timber from the surrounding forests, moss from the ground, and animal hides from their hunts, was not only practical but symbolic. These were the materials that connected them to the land, to the animals they lived with, and to the world around them. The Vikings didn't see themselves as separate from nature. They were an integral part of it, and every part of their longhouse reflected that bond. Historians continue to discuss the extent to which the Viking longhouse was a reflection of Viking spirituality. For some, the hearth at the center of the house was more than just a practical feature. It was the center of the home's spiritual energy. Fire, in many ancient cultures, was considered a link between the mortal world and the divine. For the Vikings, the hearth may have been a sacred space where they honored their gods and ancestors. In a world dominated by the harsh elements, it's easy to imagine how the warmth and light of the fire became a symbol of divine protection and connection, providing both physical and spiritual comfort. Even the layout of the longhouse reflected the importance of the hearth. It was located at the center of the home, and everything else was arranged around it. This arrangement ensured that the warmth and light of the fire could reach everyone in the household, reinforcing the communal nature of Viking society. The structure of the longhouse also allowed for different family members to work together in close quarters, share resources, and support one another. The home wasn't just a shelter, it was the embodiment of Viking values, cooperation, respect for the environment, and unity. As the fire fades into soft embers, you can imagine the longhouse as it would have been in its prime, alive, with activity, filled with the sounds of voices, laughter, and stories. In a world where winter could stretch for months and the cold could kill, the longhouse was a sanctuary, a safe space where the community came together to face the challenges of the world outside. It was in these homes that the Viking spirit was nurtured, where each generation learned the ways of survival, resilience, and cooperation. In many ways, the Viking longhouse was a place where the past, present, and future met. The longhouse was filled with stories of battles fought, of gods worshipped, of family legacies passed down. These stories, told around the hearth, were more than just entertainment. They were a way of preserving history, of keeping the Viking culture alive. Each time a story was told, it reinforced the collective memory of the people, helping to ensure that the lessons of the past were never forgotten. It's fascinating to think about how the Vikings viewed their homes. The longhouse wasn't just a shelter for the body, it was a sanctuary for the mind and spirit. It was a place where the cold and dark of winter could be kept at bay, but it was also a place where the warmth of community and family could grow. In this sense, the longhouse was a symbol of the Viking ability to adapt to the world around them, and to create a space where survival wasn't just about endurance, but about connection and unity. When we think about the Vikings, we often imagine warriors and explorers, people who braved the seas and conquered lands far and wide. But the longhouse shows us another side of their existence, one that was grounded in community, respect for the environment, and a deep connection to their heritage. The longhouse was a place where Viking families could come together to endure the cold, share in the warmth of the fire, and honor the gods and ancestors who came before them. In the end, the Viking longhouse was more than just a shelter. It was a living testament to the Viking way of life. It was a symbol of their resilience, their ability to adapt to their environment, and their commitment to the well-being of their community. It was a place where survival wasn't just about getting through the winter. It was about living in a way that honored the land, the people, and the spirits that guided them. As the night draws on and the last embers fade into darkness, you realize that the longhouse, with its warmth, its history, and its communal spirit, remains a lasting symbol of the Viking legacy. A legacy not just of warriors and conquerors, but of survivors, people who learned to live in harmony with the harshest of worlds, to work together, and to endure, no matter what the storm brought. The fire is now nothing more than a soft glow in the ashes, and the warmth that once filled the longhouse has begun to ebb, leaving behind the quiet embrace of the night. Outside, the stars gleam in the crisp, clear sky, their cold light a sharp contrast to the cozy haven within the longhouse walls. In this stillness, you can feel the pulse of Viking life, a people who endured harsh winters not just by building strong homes, but by creating a culture that thrived on unity, respect for nature, and the strength of community. The longhouse wasn't just a shelter against the elements, it was a place where the very essence of Viking identity took root. As you sit in this quiet reflection, it's impossible not to marvel at the Vikings' ability to not only survive, but flourish in such a difficult environment. The Viking longhouse, with its timber frame, its protective roof, and its central hearth, was a testament to their ingenuity. But perhaps even more remarkable was the social and emotional resilience it provided. It wasn't just the physical shelter that allowed the Vikings to survive, it was the warmth of their relationships, the shared stories, and the deep ties of kinship that ensured their endurance. What strikes you most is how the longhouse was built to foster this resilience, not just physically but spiritually and emotionally. The longhouse wasn't simply a space to escape the cold, it was a place where the people of the community came together to strengthen the ties that bound them. The very design of the longhouse, open, communal, centered around the hearth, created a space for shared experiences and mutual support. No Viking was ever truly alone, for within the walls of the longhouse, there was always a sense of collective strength. The hearth, once again, stands at the center of it all. While its primary function was to provide warmth, its role as a social and spiritual gathering point cannot be overlooked. At the hearth, families came together to share food, pass down traditions, and reflect on the struggles of the day. It was the place where the eldest shared their wisdom, where the young learned the stories of their ancestors, and where the bonds of kinship were renewed. The fire itself was more than a source of heat, it was the heart of the Viking home, a symbol of life and continuity in a world defined by the brutal forces of nature. The communal nature of Viking society was essential to their survival. While the harshness of winter often forced people into isolation, the longhouse provided a refuge that allowed for cooperation, collective action, and mutual care. In Viking culture, survival wasn't just about individual strength, it was about the strength of the community as a whole. The longhouse was a reflection of this ethos, designed not only to shelter and protect the body, but to nurture the bonds that kept people strong and united. The layout of the longhouse itself further emphasizes this principle. It wasn't just about practical shelter, it was a deliberate design that fostered social cohesion. The central hearth wasn't simply placed for warmth, but as a gathering point for the family, a symbol of the centrality of community and shared experiences. The sleeping quarters were arranged around the hearth, allowing family members to be close to one another and to the warmth of the fire. In this way, the longhouse wasn't just a shelter, it was a vessel for maintaining strong familial ties, ensuring that even in the darkest of winters, the warmth of community prevailed. It's also worth considering how Viking homes, though built for function, were rich with symbolism. Every piece of timber, every stone, every strip of hide that went into the longhouse had significance. The materials used weren't just chosen for their utility, they were deeply connected to the Vikings' spiritual and cultural beliefs. Wood, for example, was sacred to many of the northern peoples, representing the link between the gods and the earth. By using timber to build their homes, the Vikings were not only creating a structure for survival, they were reaffirming their connection to the divine and to the land that sustained them. These spiritual beliefs were not limited to rituals outside the home. The longhouse itself could be seen as a sacred space, a place where the family's connection to the gods was honored. Offerings might be placed near the hearth, and prayers would be said for protection and prosperity in the coming months. The longhouse, with its central fire, symbolized both the physical warmth needed to survive and the spiritual warmth that connected the family to their gods. The hearth, then, becomes not just a feature of the home, but a conduit between the mortal and divine realms. Viking society was deeply connected to the land. The longhouse, with its use of local materials and its design to withstand the elements, reflects this bond. The Vikings understood the land intimately, knowing which trees to fell for the most resilient timber, which moss to harvest for insulation, and how to construct homes that could endure the extremes of the north. Their survival was not just about conquering nature, it was about working with it. Every resource, from the wood of the forests to the hides of the animals, was used to its fullest potential. This respect for nature extended beyond the home and into the very way the Vikings lived and worked. You might even consider how the Viking longhouse, in its simplicity, was a place of both physical and spiritual sustainability. The Vikings didn't have the luxury of modern tools or conveniences, but they made do with what they had, always adapting to the circumstances and ensuring that nothing went to waste. The use of natural materials in the construction of the longhouse, the efficient use of space, and the communal living arrangements all reflect the Viking ethos of efficiency, practicality, and respect for the earth. The Vikings' ability to thrive in such a harsh environment speaks to their resourcefulness and their deep connection to the land. They didn't just build homes to survive, they created spaces where life could be lived to the fullest, even in the face of adversity. The longhouse was a reflection of that spirit, a place where survival wasn't just about enduring the elements, but about creating a life that was rich with community, tradition, and respect for the land. The longhouse, in the end, was more than a shelter, it was a cornerstone of Viking society. It was where families came together, where the bonds of kinship were formed, and where the values of resilience, unity, and respect for nature were passed down from generation to generation. It wasn't just a place to live, it was a place to thrive, a space where the Vikings could endure the harsh winters of the north, not just as individuals, but as a united community. As you sit by the dying fire, you feel a deep sense of connection to those who lived in these longhouses long ago. Their strength, their resilience, and their sense of community are embedded in the very walls of the longhouse, a testament to the enduring spirit of the Viking people. Despite the cold, the storms, and the challenges of their environment, the Vikings created homes that would endure for centuries, a lasting legacy of survival, strength, and unity. The night has deepened, and with it comes a sense of stillness that contrasts sharply with the furious blizzards of earlier. The longhouse, now quiet except for the soft crackling of the embers in the hearth, feels almost timeless. It stands as it always has, a testament to the Viking ability to adapt, survive, and thrive. The wind may still howl outside, but within these walls, the longhouse continues to offer warmth, protection, and a profound sense of belonging. In this space, the Viking spirit of unity and endurance is not just alive, it pulses through every beam of wood, every stone used in the hearth, and every layer of thatched roof. As you sit back and take in the atmosphere of this Viking home, you realize that what makes the longhouse so remarkable isn't just the materials it was made from, or the techniques used in its construction. It's how the longhouse embodies the values and principles that defined Viking culture. The way the hearth is positioned at the center of the home, how the families sleep close to each other to share warmth, and how everything is structured to support communal living. All of these features speak to the Viking philosophy that survival is a collective endeavor. The longhouse wasn't simply a building, it was a living, breathing expression of Viking identity. It was built with not only practicality, but with a deep understanding of what it meant to be part of a community. The Vikings, even in the coldest, darkest months, knew the importance of connection. They knew that survival depended on cooperation, on shared resources, and on the strength of the bonds that tied them together. The central hearth wasn't just a tool for survival, it was the social heart of the longhouse, where families would gather, tell stories, and bond over shared meals. It was where wisdom was passed down, where laughter echoed off the wooden walls, and where future generations would learn about the values that shaped Viking life. The hearth, as a focal point, kept the Viking tradition of community alive, reminding each member of the household that they were not alone in facing the challenges of life. There's something deeply comforting in this realization. The Viking longhouse, in all its simplicity, was a space where the burdens of life could be shared. It wasn't just about staying warm, it was about sharing that warmth with others. It wasn't just about surviving the storm, it was about enduring it together, as a family, as a community. Every Viking who lived in these longhouses, no matter their role, contributed to the larger goal of survival, of keeping the fire burning, both literally and figuratively. One of the more fascinating aspects of Viking life was how deeply embedded their cultural practices were in their everyday routines. The Vikings didn't separate the spiritual from the physical. For them, survival wasn't just about maintaining shelter or finding food, it was about honoring the gods, the earth, and the elements that sustained them. The very construction of the longhouse reflected this interconnectedness. The use of animal hides, for example, was not just practical, it was symbolic. The Vikings saw the animals they hunted as spiritual companions, and their hides, along with the wood they harvested from the forest, were offerings to the gods who protected them. The Vikings understood that their survival was linked to the balance they maintained with the land. Their homes reflected this idea, built from the resources they gathered in the forests and fields around them, and designed to work with the natural elements, not against them. The steep roof, the thick walls, the central hearth, all were methods of adaptation, of harmonizing with their environment rather than attempting to dominate it. The Vikings knew the harshness of their world, but they also understood how to live within it, to respect it and adapt to it, ensuring that they could thrive in it. Historians still debate the level of spirituality embedded in Viking architecture, especially when it comes to the longhouse. Some suggest that the very act of building a home in this way was an expression of their belief in the divine, that their homes were as much temples as they were shelters. The placement of the hearth, the use of sacred materials, and the rituals performed around the fire all suggest that the Vikings saw their homes as spaces of both physical and spiritual survival. They didn't just want to stay alive, they wanted to live in a way that was connected to the divine forces that they believed shaped their fate. Yet, the Viking longhouse wasn't solely focused on survival and spirituality. It was also a place where Viking culture flourished in a more day-to-day, practical sense. The longhouse was where children learned their first lessons, not just in survival, but in the values that defined Viking society: honor, loyalty, and bravery. It was where the stories of heroes and gods were passed from one generation to the next, where the next generation of Vikings learned to navigate their world. The longhouse was both a shelter from the cold and a crucible where Viking identity was forged, tested, and passed down. Even as the longhouse provided protection from the elements, it offered an equally valuable protection from the pressures of the outside world. The Vikings, known for their raiding and explorations, often faced dangers that went beyond the cold and the storms. Their longhouses were safe havens where they could regroup, recover, and strengthen their resolve before facing the next challenge. These homes, while humble in design, were the heart of Viking civilization, places where survival wasn't just about enduring, but about thriving in the face of adversity. And so, in the quiet that follows the storm, as you sit in the warmth of the longhouse, you begin to understand just how much the Vikings valued these homes. They were more than shelter. They were symbols of resilience, unity, and survival. These longhouses weren't just places to survive the winter, they were places to live, to learn, to connect, and to honor everything the Vikings held dear. They were places where strength, warmth, and community could be found, even when the world outside seemed determined to tear everything apart. The longhouse may have been simple in structure, but its significance in Viking life was anything but simple. It was where life's most important values, family, community, resilience, and respect for nature came together. The Vikings built these homes not just to survive, but to live fully, to honor their traditions, and to create a space where they could endure, together, no matter what the world outside threw at them. As the embers of the fire slowly fade, leaving only a soft glow in the hearth, the quiet of the longhouse feels profound. The warmth that filled the space now lingers in the corners, a steady presence that was essential not just for comfort, but for the continuity of Viking life. The longhouse, though no longer crackling with activity, remains a quiet testament to a way of life that was not just about survival, but about thriving in harmony with nature, with each other, and with the gods they revered. In the stillness of this night, you realize that the Viking longhouse, despite its apparent simplicity, held immense significance. It was a space that transcended the basic necessity of shelter. The longhouse was a foundation, an enduring symbol of the Viking worldview, where everything, from the construction of their homes to the way they lived and worked, was interconnected. The longhouse wasn't just a physical shelter, it was a space where spiritual and cultural traditions were kept alive, where survival was not only physical but emotional and social. The design of the longhouse, with its communal space and its focus on shared warmth, reflects how deeply the Vikings valued cooperation. The central hearth, more than just a source of heat, was a symbol of unity. It wasn't merely for cooking or staying warm, it was the place where families gathered, where stories were told, where meals were shared, and where the bonds that held the community together were strengthened. It was a gathering place for both family and spirit, a reminder that no Viking was ever truly alone in the fight against the cold. The closeness of the living arrangements, with families sleeping in the same space, is another testament to the communal nature of Viking society. Unlike the isolated, private spaces of modern homes, the longhouse was designed for interaction and support. It was a space where the warmth wasn't just from the fire, it was from the collective strength of those who lived there. The layout of the longhouse promoted this unity, with everyone sleeping close to each other, ensuring that the warmth of the hearth extended to every corner. This physical proximity was a reflection of the Viking philosophy that unity and survival go hand in hand. There is also a quiet strength in how the Vikings built their homes with the land in mind. They didn't just use the resources that were available to them, they used them wisely, with great respect for the environment. The timber that made up the longhouse was not just practical, it was a connection to the forests that surrounded them. The animal skins that lined the walls were not just insulation, they were an offering to the animals who had given their lives for survival. The materials used in the construction of the longhouse were more than just functional. They were a reflection of the Vikings' deep understanding of the land and their relationship to it. The design of the longhouse also demonstrates the Viking ability to adapt to their environment. The steeply pitched roof, designed to shed snow, the thick walls made from wood and packed with moss, and the use of animal skins to insulate the space. These were all strategies to ensure that the longhouse could endure the harshest of winters. The longhouse was not only built to last, but to be in harmony with the natural world. It was a space that reflected the Vikings' respect for the land, a recognition that survival wasn't just about conquering the elements, but about working with them. The longhouse, in this sense, was more than a place to survive. It was a place where the Viking way of life could be sustained and passed on. As the seasons changed and the weather fluctuated, the longhouse remained a constant, a space where traditions were honored, where survival was a shared effort, and where the community came together to face whatever challenges lay ahead. It wasn't just a shelter from the cold, it was a place where family, history, and culture lived on. As you sit in the warm glow of the fading fire, you begin to understand how the longhouse embodied the Viking spirit, one of resilience, unity, and respect for the forces of nature. It was a home built not just to survive, but to thrive in a world that could often feel unforgiving. The fire, still glowing softly in the hearth, becomes a symbol of that enduring spirit, a light that will continue to shine through the darkest of winters, just as it did for the Vikings. The longhouse, in all its simplicity, held more than just warmth. It held the strength of a people who knew that survival was not just about enduring hardship, but about building something lasting, something that would stand the test of time. The Vikings didn't just build homes to weather the cold, they built homes to preserve their way of life, to nurture their community, and to pass on the values that had sustained them for generations. The longhouse was, in many ways, their legacy. As the night stretches on and the fire dwindles, You can almost hear the voices of the Vikings who lived here long ago. You can feel their presence, their strength, their sense of unity. And you realize that the Longhouse is more than just a building. It is a symbol of everything the Vikings were and everything they valued: resilience, community, connection to the land, and the unwavering belief that, together, they could survive anything the world threw at them. The Longhouse is silent now, but its legacy lives on, echoing through time. It was not just a place of warmth and shelter, it was a sanctuary where Viking values were lived and passed on. And though the storms may come and go, the spirit of the Longhouse endures, as strong and resilient as the Vikings who built it. The quiet of the night lingers as the last embers of the fire flicker out, casting the Longhouse into a soft, peaceful darkness. The wind has quieted, but the presence of the Vikings' resilience still seems to echo through the walls of this ancient shelter. The Longhouse, despite the passing of centuries, still stands as a monument to Viking strength, ingenuity, and community. Even in the stillness of the present, you can almost hear the quiet hum of life that once filled these walls, the stories, the laughter, the collective heartbeat of a people who knew how to endure, not just in the face of harsh winters, but in the face of every trial life threw their way. In this final reflection, the Longhouse stands not just as a physical space, but as a symbol of the Viking spirit, a spirit of unity, survival, and a deep connection to the land and to each other. The Vikings didn't simply survive in the cold, unforgiving north, they learned to thrive, creating homes, families, and communities that could withstand not just the elements, but the passage of time itself. It's remarkable how the Longhouse, a structure built to endure, also served as a vessel for the Vikings' deepest values. As you reflect on the communal nature of Viking life, you begin to realize that their survival wasn't simply due to their cleverness or resourcefulness. It was also about their deep belief in the strength of community. They understood that in the harshest of winters, the cold wasn't the only thing they had to fight against. Isolation, loneliness, and despair were just as dangerous. By building a home that was designed to foster community, the Vikings ensured that their bonds remained unbreakable, even in the face of the most grueling of conditions. The Longhouse was a place where family members and neighbors came together to share not just the warmth of the fire, but the warmth of human connection. Whether they were gathered to share food, tell stories, or make plans for the future, every action inside the Longhouse was about maintaining and strengthening those ties. It was in this space, this humble home, that the Vikings found their collective strength. Even in the coldest of times, the Longhouse represented the Viking philosophy that survival was about more than just enduring hardship. It was about sharing in the experience, facing challenges together, and drawing strength from one another. The Longhouse, with its central hearth and open spaces, was a reflection of this spirit. It wasn't just a home, it was a place where Viking values were lived, a space where the bonds of family and community were reinforced. As the last traces of warmth from the hearth fade into the night, it's impossible not to feel the presence of the Vikings who lived here, the people whose resilience and unity allowed them to thrive in one of the harshest environments on earth. The Longhouse wasn't just a place of refuge, it was a testament to the Viking belief that, together, they could overcome anything. They built homes not just to shelter themselves from the cold, but to shelter each other from the isolation and hardships that the long winters could bring. The Longhouse, as much as it was a physical space, was also a spiritual one. It was a place where the Vikings connected with the divine, where the fire symbolized both the warmth of life and the protection of the gods. Every time they gathered around the hearth, it wasn't just for practical reasons, it was a ritual that connected them to their ancestors, to the gods, and to the land that sustained them. In a way, the Longhouse was a bridge between the physical world and the spiritual one, a space where the divine and mortal realms intersected. Through the walls of the Longhouse, you can sense the deep bond the Vikings had with their environment. Every element of the house, from the wood used in the frame to the moss that insulated the walls, came from the land they inhabited. The Vikings didn't just take from the land, they worked with it. using what was available to create homes that were not just functional but in harmony with the environment around them. In this way, the longhouse was not only a shelter, it was a reflection of the Vikings' respect for nature and their understanding of the delicate balance between survival and harmony with the earth. The longhouse also stood as a reminder of the Vikings' connection to each other. It wasn't just a space for individual survival. It was a space that fostered the survival of the community. The communal nature of the home, the shared hearth, and the proximity of family members reflected the Viking understanding that survival depended on cooperation and unity. The longhouse wasn't just a physical shelter, it was the embodiment of the Viking ideal that strength comes not just from individual prowess, but from the bonds that unite us. As the embers continue to fade, you feel the weight of the history that this longhouse carries. It wasn't just a shelter from the cold, it was the heart of Viking life. It was where the strength of the community was nurtured, where the bonds of family were reinforced, and where survival was not just about enduring but about living fully in connection with each other and the world around them. It wasn't just the fire in the hearth that kept the longhouse warm, it was the fire of the Viking spirit, passed down through generations, that kept it alive. The longhouse wasn't just a place where the Vikings survived, it was a place where they found meaning, where they connected with each other, and where they lived according to the values that defined them. It stands as a lasting symbol of Viking resilience, unity, and the deep belief that together they could endure the harshest of winters, the fiercest storms, and the challenges of the world around them. And as the night grows deeper and the longhouse stands in quiet repose, you can almost hear the echoes of those who lived here, Vikings whose legacy of survival, strength, and unity continues to endure, even now, in the homes we build today. The soft crackle of the remaining embers is the only sound that fills the air, as the longhouse rests in the silence of the night. The once fierce storm outside has given way to a crisp, quiet calm, and the air feels almost magical, as though the world itself has paused. Within the longhouse, though, time feels as though it has stopped altogether. Its walls, thick and enduring, have witnessed centuries of history, of survival, and of the ever-present human need to connect, to endure, and to thrive. As you sit by the hearth, its embers glowing faintly, you begin to feel the significance of this shelter, not just as a physical structure but as a symbol of an entire way of life. The Viking longhouse was far more than a building. It was the epicenter of Viking culture, a microcosm of everything the Vikings stood for: resilience, unity, respect for the earth, and an unwavering belief in the strength of community. It was built to survive the elements, yes, but it also served to nurture the emotional, spiritual, and social connections that were just as essential for survival. This connection between the Vikings and their homes was more than just practical, it was personal. Every part of the longhouse, the walls made of timber, the roof covered with thatch or sod, the hearth at the center, was not merely a solution to the physical challenges they faced, but a reflection of their worldview. They didn't simply endure the cold. They thrived by creating a space that allowed them to come together, to share warmth, and to build lasting bonds with the people around them. In these homes, the Vikings found not only protection from the elements, but the strength to carry on when the world seemed unrelenting. As you reflect on the Viking longhouse, it's impossible not to feel a sense of awe for their ingenuity. Their homes were designed to reflect their values: practicality, efficiency, and communal living. They used natural materials, but they did so with reverence. The timber, harvested from the forests around them, wasn't just used to build walls, it was a living part of their world, a sacred material tied to their gods. Animal hides weren't just insulation, they were offerings from the creatures that had shared their lives. Every element of the longhouse was a tangible expression of their respect for the land, for the animals they depended on, and for the gods who watched over them. In Viking society, survival was never an individual endeavor. Even in the harshest of winters, when the cold seemed to seep into every crevice, the Vikings knew that they couldn't make it alone. They needed each other. The design of the longhouse itself reflected this. Its open spaces and central hearth were not only functional, but they ensured that family and community members remained close, physically and emotionally. The longhouse was a place where people were not isolated but constantly engaged with one another. It was a place where they could find support, comfort, and strength in each other. The central hearth, as the focal point of the longhouse, wasn't just a place to cook food or stay warm, it was the symbolic heart of the home. It brought people together, just as the Vikings themselves were brought together by their shared history, values, and the need to protect one another. Families didn't just gather around the fire for warmth, they gathered for connection. They told stories, passed down traditions, and shared experiences that would bind them together for generations. The fire in the hearth was also a link to the divine. The Vikings believed that fire was a gift from the gods, a sacred element that connected the mortal world to the realm of the divine. By maintaining the fire, they were honoring the gods and seeking their protection. In this way, the hearth wasn't just a practical feature, it was a spiritual center. It was a place of life, light, and warmth that sustained not only the body but also the soul. The Vikings didn't just rely on the fire for warmth, they relied on it for guidance, for protection, and for a sense of continuity in a world that could often feel unpredictable and hostile. As the night grows even quieter, you think about how this simple structure, the longhouse, was also a place of teaching. It was here that Viking children learned about their heritage, about the gods, the heroes, and the battles that shaped their culture. It was where they learned the values that would guide them throughout their lives. The importance of community, of kinship, of respect for the land and for each other. The longhouse wasn't just a shelter, it was a school, a place of growth, where every generation learned from the one before it. This generational passing down of knowledge, values, and traditions was crucial for the survival of Viking culture. The longhouse, with its constant ebb and flow of activity, was a place where the past, present, and future were interconnected. The hearth was a physical manifestation of this, a constant fire that never truly went out. Just as the values and traditions of the Vikings were passed from one generation to the next. Now, as the embers fade into ash, you realize that the Viking longhouse, with all its practicality and simplicity, was also a reflection of a deep cultural wisdom. The Vikings knew that survival wasn't just about shelter, it was about the connections between people, the respect for the earth, and the ability to live in harmony with the world around them. The longhouse was a sanctuary not just from the cold, but from the isolation and despair that could so easily set in during the long winters. It was a space for connection, for survival, and for celebration. As the fire dies down and the world outside becomes quiet once more, you can almost hear the laughter of Viking families echoing through the walls of the longhouse. The storm may have passed, but the spirit of the longhouse remains alive in the warmth, in the stories, and in the bonds that were forged within these walls. The Viking longhouse wasn't just a building, it was the heart of Viking life, a place where survival, community, and culture came together to create a legacy that would endure long after the fire had gone out. The longhouse stands silent now, as it has for centuries, the memory of countless lives lived within its walls lingering in the stillness. The embers of the fire have finally burned out, but the warmth that once filled the air seems to remain, hanging in the very fibers of the structure. The wind may howl outside, but inside the walls of the longhouse, there is peace. There is a deep sense of connection to the past, to the land, and to the people who lived and loved here. It's as though the longhouse is not just a physical structure, but a living testament to the Viking spirit, a spirit that will not be easily forgotten. As you sit in the quiet, you reflect on everything the longhouse represents: survival, community, unity. It wasn't just a refuge from the storm, though it served that purpose well. The longhouse was a vessel of Viking culture and identity. It was a space where the Viking way of life could thrive, even in the harshest of winters. It was a place where, despite the brutal cold and isolation, The Vikings created warmth not just through the fire in the hearth, but through the bonds they shared with one another. In thinking about it, it becomes clear that the longhouse was far more than a shelter. It was a physical manifestation of Viking values. Every beam, every piece of timber used in its construction, every material chosen for its insulation, had meaning. They weren't just tools for survival, they were part of a larger, spiritual story. The wood from the forests wasn't just material, it was sacred, a gift from the gods. The animal skins weren't just used for warmth, they were offerings from the creatures who gave their lives to sustain the Vikings. The longhouse was built not only for protection but as a form of reverence toward the land, toward the gods, and toward each other. Vikings were a people deeply connected to their environment, and that connection was evident in the way they lived. They didn't just take from the land, they worked with it, using what was available to them to create homes that were as much a part of the natural world as they were. The longhouse wasn't an intrusion into the environment, it was an extension of it. The Vikings knew that their survival depended on understanding and respecting the land, and their homes reflected this understanding. It was as though every aspect of the longhouse, the slope of the roof, the insulation of the walls, the positioning of the hearth was in harmony with the natural world, not separate from it. This connection to nature was also reflected in the way the Vikings lived within their homes. The longhouse was designed not for individualism, but for unity. The communal living arrangements, with families sleeping near the hearth and sharing space, were essential for survival in the cold, dark winters, but they also fostered a deep sense of connection. The Vikings understood that to survive the harsh winters, they needed each other. The longhouse was a physical space that encouraged that unity, encouraging shared warmth, shared work, and shared responsibility. It wasn't just about surviving the cold, it was about enduring together. As you sit there, lost in thought, you feel the sense of peace that emanates from the longhouse. It's easy to forget, in a world so different from the Vikings' time, just how much they relied on their homes to sustain them. The longhouse wasn't just a place to eat and sleep, it was where they formed the bonds that would hold them together through the toughest of times. It was where they honored their gods, their ancestors, and the land that gave them life. The hearth was a place of spiritual significance, a space where the fire wasn't just a source of warmth, but a connection to the divine. Every meal shared around the hearth, every prayer, every story told by the firelight, reinforced the ties that bound the community together. The Vikings knew that life wasn't just about enduring hardships, it was about living in a way that honored the land and each other. The longhouse wasn't just a shelter from the storm, it was a space where Viking life could flourish, where strength was drawn from both the land and the people. It was where survival wasn't just about physical endurance, it was about honoring the relationships that helped them endure. It was about creating a sense of belonging, where every Viking, young and old, could find warmth not just from the fire, but from the love, support, and strength of the family and community. As the last of the embers fade, the night deepens, and you realize that the longhouse, though no longer bustling with activity, remains a living testament to everything the Vikings stood for. It was their resilience, their unity, their respect for the earth and each other that allowed them to survive in one of the harshest climates in the world. And even now, as you sit in the quiet of the night, you can feel the enduring presence of the Viking spirit, strong, unyielding, and full of life. The longhouse, in all its simplicity, stands as a lasting symbol of what it means to endure, not just through the cold, but through the trials of life. It represents the heart of Viking culture, community, resilience, and a deep respect for the world around them. The storm may have passed, but the fire that once burned in the hearth of the longhouse continues to burn brightly in the legacy of the Vikings, in the strength of their homes, their families, and their spirits. As the quiet of the night deepens and the wind outside settles into a gentle breeze, you feel a peaceful sense of stillness. The longhouse, though now an empty shell, continues to stand as a symbol of the Viking ethos, the resilience of the human spirit, the importance of unity, and the enduring connection to the land. The storm has passed, but the Viking legacy remains, woven into the very fabric of the longhouse, echoing through its walls, its beams, its hearth. The design of the longhouse, with its carefully crafted roof and thick insulated walls, was an intricate dance between survival and culture. Each layer of the structure served a dual purpose, not only to shelter against the cold, but to reflect the values the Vikings held dear. The longhouse was both a sanctuary and a space for life. It wasn't just about weathering the elements, it was about creating an environment where people could thrive in the face of those elements, drawing strength from each other and the world around them. The central hearth was the beating heart of Viking life. It wasn't simply a source of warmth, it was where the family came together, where the bonds of kinship were strengthened. This communal aspect of Viking life, built into the very structure of the longhouse, made the home not just a shelter, but a reflection of their philosophy. The longhouse was a place where survival wasn't just about enduring, it was about connection, about nurturing relationships, and about living in harmony with nature and one another. It's almost impossible not to imagine the Vikings, sitting around the hearth, the crackling of the fire echoing through the room as they shared stories of gods, heroes, and faraway lands. The Vikings lived their lives through stories of bravery, wisdom, and survival, and the longhouse was where these stories came to life. Around the hearth, history was not something read in books. It was something lived, something spoken, something shared from one generation to the next. There's an incredible sense of continuity in this. The longhouse was a space where the past, present, and future were connected. Every story told around the fire was a thread in the fabric of Viking culture, passed down through the generations. Each family member, whether young or old, played a part in maintaining that cultural thread, reinforcing the values that bound them together: bravery, loyalty, respect for the gods, and, most importantly, the idea that survival was a communal effort. The longhouse wasn't just a physical structure, it was a vessel of memory and identity. It stood as a reminder that Viking life was deeply intertwined with the land and the people who lived on it. It wasn't enough for the Vikings to simply endure. They lived with purpose, guided by their beliefs, and supported by the community around them. And the longhouse was the embodiment of that purpose. It was a home that allowed them to be more than survivors. It allowed them to be connected to something larger than themselves, connected to the land, their ancestors, and each other. In thinking about how the longhouse helped the Vikings survive, it's clear that it was the unity within the longhouse that was their true strength. They didn't rely on one person to bear the burden of survival. It was a collective effort. When the wind howled outside, it was the warmth of shared space that kept the cold at bay. When food was scarce, it was the cooperation of the group that ensured no one went hungry. And when hardship struck, it was the bond between family members, neighbors, and the broader community that gave them the strength to carry on. Even as the world outside grew quieter and the embers in the hearth flicker low, you sense that the spirit of the longhouse endures. The warmth of the fire may have faded, but the Viking values embedded in the home persist, values of unity, resilience, and respect for both nature and community. In every beam, every stone, and every piece of timber, there is a story of survival and strength. The Viking longhouse was a space where those values were lived out, where the bonds of kinship were reinforced, and where the challenges of life were met with collective courage. As you reflect on the legacy of the longhouse, you begin to understand how much it shaped the Vikings, not just as survivors, but as people who thrived through connection. It wasn't simply about enduring the cold or the challenges of nature. It was about building something that would stand through the tests of time, something that would provide warmth, shelter, and security not just for one person, but for many. It was a reflection of the idea that survival is never just an individual effort. It is something shared. It is something forged through community. The Viking longhouse may no longer be filled with the sounds of laughter, storytelling, or the warmth of shared meals, but its presence remains. In the stories passed down through generations, in the lessons learned from those who built it, the longhouse lives on. It stands as a lasting monument to the Viking way of life, one of endurance, unity, and respect for the world around them. And though time has moved on, the spirit of the longhouse remains, echoing through the winds, through the trees, and through the hearts of those who continue to honor the Viking legacy. As the night winds down, you feel the weight of history settle into the room, the longhouse standing quietly as a testament to everything the Vikings endured and everything they built. In its simplicity, in its design, and in its spirit, the Viking longhouse will always remain. A place of warmth, a place of connection, and a place where the Viking people learned not just to survive, but to live. The night lingers on, and the longhouse seems to breathe with the quiet rhythm of centuries past. Though the fire has long since dimmed to a few final embers, you can still sense the life that once filled this space. The Viking longhouse was never just a shelter. It was a home, a place of gathering, connection, and enduring strength. The wind may howl and the storm may pass, but inside these walls, the spirit of Viking resilience stands unshaken. As you sit in the stillness, the quiet almost seems to echo the heartbeats of those who lived here before. It's easy to imagine them families, neighbors, generations gathered around the hearth, sharing warmth and stories, facing the harsh conditions together. The longhouse wasn't just a physical structure, it was a foundation for life, a space where survival was a shared endeavor, where the bonds of family and community were woven into every timber and beam. But survival wasn't all the longhouse offered. It was also a place where the Vikings thrived through their connection to one another. It was through shared work, shared experiences, and shared warmth that the Viking spirit was sustained. The communal nature of the longhouse, with its single hearth at the center, reinforced this philosophy. It wasn't just about staying warm, it was about staying connected. The hearth wasn't merely for warmth, it was the place where stories were told, where the wisdom of ancestors was passed down, and where the very essence of Viking culture was kept alive. As you think about the design of the longhouse, it becomes clear just how much it reflects the values of Viking society. The Vikings didn't just build to survive, they built to ensure that life within the longhouse was centered on cooperation, respect, and unity. The central hearth wasn't just a functional feature, it was a symbol of the collective warmth and strength that bound them together. The longhouse wasn't just a shelter from the cold, it was a sanctuary where they could endure, together, with shared purpose and support. What's truly remarkable is how the longhouse allowed the Vikings to transcend isolation. In a world where winters could last for months and the elements could be unforgiving, isolation was a dangerous thing. But the Vikings understood that isolation wasn't just physical, it could also be emotional and spiritual. The longhouse kept them close to each other, ensuring that the fire of community, family, and tradition never went out. Even as the world outside turned cold and dark, inside the longhouse, the warmth of shared experiences kept the Viking spirit alive. The longhouse was a place where the physical challenges of the environment were met with emotional and social resilience. It wasn't just about enduring the cold, it was about drawing strength from the people around you. It was about maintaining the warmth of the hearth, the bond of the family, and the unity of the community, no matter how fierce the storm outside might be. The Vikings knew that survival wasn't just about individual strength, it was about collective strength. And this collective strength wasn't just a practical strategy, it was at the core of Viking identity. The longhouse was where Viking culture was nurtured and passed down, from generation to generation. It was where children learned about their history, their gods, and their heritage. It was where the wisdom of the elders was shared, where knowledge and skills were passed along. The longhouse wasn't just a shelter for physical survival, it was a space where the future was shaped, where the values that defined the Vikings were reinforced, and where the legacy of their people was preserved. The Vikings may have been known for their warriors and explorers, but it was in the quiet, shared spaces of the longhouse that their true strength lay. It was here that they built their communities, maintained their traditions, and ensured that they could face any challenge together. The longhouse was a space that allowed them to thrive not just as individuals, but as a collective, bound by the values that held their society together. And so, in the stillness of the night, you feel the weight of that legacy. The longhouse, though empty now, stands as a monument to the Viking way of life, one where survival was not just a matter of endurance, but a shared experience. It was a space where people came together, faced the cold together, and drew strength from each other. The longhouse wasn't just a building, it was a reflection of the Viking values that allowed them to thrive in a harsh world. The last embers of the fire flicker out, and the night deepens into stillness. But the longhouse remains, a silent sentinel of the past. The Viking spirit, carried in the walls and beams of this humble structure, continues to endure. Though the storm has passed, the legacy of the longhouse, of Viking unity and resilience, will remain forever. The night stretches on, and the longhouse, though quiet and still now, feels alive with the weight of history. The final whispers of the storm outside are carried away on the wind, but the longhouse remains a constant, a place where the past and present coexist. The warmth of the hearth has long since faded, yet the energy of the space, the sense of shared survival, lingers in the air like a soft, comforting embrace. As you sit in the lingering quiet, you can't help but marvel at the ingenuity of the Viking longhouse. The materials used, the design, the positioning of the hearth, it all came together in such a way that it allowed Viking families to endure the harshest winters. But more than that, it was a space designed for life. It was built to foster connection, community, and continuity, ensuring that the Vikings could not only survive, but thrive in a world that could be unforgiving. The longhouse was a place where survival was not simply about staying warm or protecting yourself from the elements. It was about living, about creating a space where people could come together, share stories, and find meaning even in the most challenging of circumstances. The central hearth, always aglow, was a beacon of hope and connection. It brought people together in ways that allowed them to not just endure the cold, but to turn it into an opportunity for togetherness. Imagine how the Vikings would have sat around that hearth, the flames flickering as they shared their days, their struggles, and their triumphs. It wasn't just about escaping the cold, it was about creating warmth, emotional warmth, social warmth, and spiritual warmth. The hearth was the epicenter of life in the longhouse, and it was the shared experiences around that fire that allowed Viking communities to remain strong. The flames that once burned bright weren't just providing heat, they were feeding the soul of Viking society. What truly stands out as you think about the Viking longhouse is how it embodied the very values that the Vikings held dear: strength, unity, respect for nature, and a belief that survival was a shared effort. The longhouse wasn't just a shelter, it was a place where the essence of Viking life could be lived, breathed, and passed down. It was a place where lessons of resilience were not only taught but lived out every day. The longhouse, with its communal layout, its central hearth, and its design for enduring the cold, was a reflection of the Viking philosophy that life should be lived in close connection with others. The Vikings understood that survival wasn't just about the individual, it was about the collective, the family, the clan, the community. These were the building blocks of Viking life. The longhouse was where these connections were nurtured, and where the shared responsibility of survival was upheld. As you think about the shared responsibilities within the longhouse, it becomes clear just how integral everyone was to the well-being of the group. Each person had their role, whether it was gathering wood, tending to the hearth, preparing food, or simply sharing stories. There was no room for isolation in the Viking world. Even during the coldest months of winter, the longhouse was a space that encouraged cooperation, mutual support, and connection. The warmth of the hearth wasn't just about the fire, it was about the collective effort that kept it burning. The longhouse wasn't just about practicality, it was about creating a space that reflected the deep interconnectedness of Viking society. It was a home, yes, but it was also a place of learning, a place of celebration, and a place of memory. The stories shared around the hearth weren't just entertainment, they were the fabric of Viking culture. These stories kept the past alive and ensured that the wisdom of previous generations would not be forgotten. It was in the longhouse that the Vikings could honor their ancestors and gods, reconnecting with the traditions and values that sustained them. As the night deepens and the embers flicker out, you feel the enduring power of the Viking longhouse. The storm has passed, the fire has gone out, but the essence of what the longhouse represented, the unity, the resilience, the connection to nature and community remains. The longhouse was more than just a physical structure. It was a space where Viking identity could thrive. It was a home where survival wasn't just about enduring the cold. It was about embracing the cold together, drawing strength from one another, and ensuring that the spirit of Viking life would never be extinguished. The Viking longhouse, though no longer filled with the bustle of daily life, still stands as a lasting testament to the strength and unity of the Viking people. Its walls, thick with history, carry the stories of generations, of battles fought, of gods honored, and of families sustained through the harshest of winters. The longhouse wasn't just a shelter, it was a space where Viking identity was forged, where resilience and unity were nurtured, and where the fire of Viking life burned brightly through even the darkest nights. As the silence of the night settles deeper, the remnants of the hearth's glow gently fade, leaving the longhouse to rest under the quiet stars. The soft wind outside, now a mere whisper compared to the storm that raged earlier, carries with it the scent of snow and the crispness of winter's grip. Yet, inside, the longhouse endures, its history and spirit as alive as the fire that once burned so brightly within. The Vikings may no longer occupy these walls, but their legacy, their way of life, their values still echoes here, quietly but powerfully. As you sit back in the stillness, you realize how much the Viking longhouse was more than just a physical structure. It was an embodiment of a worldview, a way of living that valued unity, strength, and resilience. The longhouse was built with more than just wood and stone. It was built with the shared dreams and collective efforts of those who called it home. The longhouse wasn't merely a refuge from the cold, it was a space that nurtured life, from the physical to the emotional and spiritual, creating a foundation for survival that was rooted in cooperation and mutual respect. Think about how the Vikings made use of every part of the environment around them, transforming the materials of the land into structures that would provide shelter and warmth. The timber from the forests, the animal hides, the moss, all were chosen not just for their functionality, but because they were gifts from nature. The longhouse itself was an extension of the land, a place where the Vikings honored the resources they had, creating homes that weren't just practical, but deeply connected to the world around them. As you sit in this imagined space, you can almost feel the pulse of Viking life, the stories told around the fire, the work shared by families, the constant exchange of knowledge and skills. The longhouse was never just a place of survival, it was a place of connection. The hearth wasn't just for heat, it was the anchor that brought the family together. Here, there was always a shared purpose: to live, to protect, and to honor the bonds that tied them together. These weren't just physical ties, they were emotional, spiritual, and cultural. The hearth served as the nucleus of Viking family life, a constant reminder that in the coldest months, it wasn't just warmth that the Vikings relied on, it was each other. The more you think about it, the more you realize that the longhouse was a statement of Viking values. Their respect for the earth, their commitment to community, and their belief in the power of shared strength are all reflected in the way their homes were built. Every element of the longhouse, the way it was designed, the materials it was made from, the arrangement of space was created with purpose. It wasn't just a home, it was a living space, a place where Vikings learned, grew, and survived together. Even when the harshness of winter seemed unrelenting, the longhouse became a sanctuary, a place that was not just sheltered from the elements but a refuge from isolation. The longhouse, as much as it was a functional space, also served as a bridge between generations. It was where the younger members of Viking society learned the stories of their ancestors, the legends of gods and heroes, and the lessons of survival and resilience. Around the hearth, the wisdom of the past was passed down to the future, ensuring that the Viking spirit would continue long after the fire had burned out. The longhouse was more than just a space for living, it was a space for remembering, for honoring those who had come before, and ensuring that their legacy would endure. Even as the fire dims and the longhouse settles into a quiet slumber, you can feel how the space holds the memory of those who lived and thrived within it. Their laughter, their struggles, their celebrations, all of it lived within these walls. The longhouse was a constant reminder of their connection to the land, to their gods, and to each other. In a world that could be unpredictable and harsh, the longhouse was a space that allowed them to create something lasting, a community, a home, and a way of life that would endure the cold, the storms, and the challenges of time. The longhouse wasn't just a building, it was a symbol of the Viking philosophy that survival wasn't merely about getting by. It was about creating something that could endure, something that reflected the unity, the strength, and the resilience of the Viking people. It was a space where the value of each person was recognized, where survival was a communal effort, and where the bonds of kinship and friendship were cherished. The longhouse was the heart of Viking life, a place where survival was transformed into thriving, where hardship was met with strength, and where the spirit of the Vikings continued to burn brightly. As the night continues and the longhouse sits in the stillness of the passing hours, it's clear that the legacy of these homes will never fade. The fire may have long gone out, but the warmth of the Viking spirit, their unity, their resilience, and their connection to each other and the world around them continues to shine. In the echoes of their lives lived within these walls, in the stories shared by the firelight, the longhouse endures as a symbol of everything the Vikings held dear. Even as the world changes, the essence of the longhouse remains, a reminder of the enduring strength of community, connection, and survival. In its quiet, steadfast presence, the Viking longhouse remains a testament to the legacy of those who lived there, a legacy of warmth, of unity, and of resilience that will never fade. The night outside is as calm as it can be, the storm a distant memory now, replaced by the serene silence of the still winter air. The longhouse, though now silent and abandoned, seems to hold an invisible pulse. Even in the emptiness, there's a sense that the life once lived within these walls continues to reverberate in the air. The spirit of the Vikings, those who braved the cold, the storms, and the unforgiving wilderness still lingers in the fibers of the wood, the design of the walls, and the echoes of the hearth where stories and survival intertwined. As you sit in this quiet reflection, the weight of what the longhouse represents becomes even clearer. The Vikings, with all their grit and resilience, didn't just build homes to survive, they built homes to create lives worth living. Every Viking longhouse wasn't merely a shelter. It was a statement that, despite the challenges of the harsh northern climate, life could and would go on, filled with warmth, community, and shared purpose. The longhouse wasn't just a refuge from the cold, it was a space where the Vikings built their lives. It was where they created memories, formed relationships, and passed down their values and wisdom to future generations. These homes were not just for survival, they were for thriving in spite of the hardship. The hearth at the center was more than just a place to cook food or stay warm, it was where the threads of Viking culture were woven together. The stories of their gods, heroes, and ancestors were passed down from one generation to the next around that very fire. It was in the warmth of the hearth that the Vikings found their spiritual and social strength. The Viking longhouse was a space designed for connection. The Vikings knew that no matter how fierce the winter, no matter how cold the nights, survival depended on the unity of the group. The longhouse, with its central hearth and communal living arrangements, was built to keep the family together, physically and emotionally. The close quarters of the longhouse were not meant to be a burden, but a reminder that survival was a collective effort. The Vikings didn't just survive the winter, they lived it together, drawing strength from each other, from the warmth of the fire, and from the shared stories and experiences that defined their way of life. It's also worth noting that the longhouse wasn't just a space for physical survival, it was a spiritual space as well. The hearth, often placed at the center of the longhouse, was a sacred space. For the Vikings, fire was a divine element, a gift from the gods that offered warmth and protection. The hearth was a place where offerings were made to the gods. Prayers were said for the health and safety of the family, and the gods' blessings were sought. The longhouse, in this sense, was both a practical shelter and a spiritual sanctuary, a place where the physical and divine worlds intertwined. But it wasn't just the hearth that made the longhouse a space for survival, it was the materials used to build it, each piece sourced from the natural world around them. The Vikings didn't just use what they had to build, they used it with reverence, respecting the earth that provided for them. The timber they harvested from the forests wasn't just for construction, it was sacred. The animal hides they used for insulation weren't just practical, they were gifts from the animals that sustained them. The design of the longhouse was a reflection of the Viking philosophy that they were not separate from nature, but part of it, working in harmony with the land to ensure their survival. In every corner of the longhouse, you can sense the Vikings' respect for the land, their deep understanding of the environment they lived in. Every beam of wood, every piece of hide, and every layer of moss that made up the longhouse was an extension of the land itself. The Vikings didn't simply take from nature, they worked with it, ensuring that their homes were built not just to survive, but to honor the world around them. The longhouse was as much a part of the landscape as the trees and rivers that surrounded it. The longhouse, in its simplicity, embodies everything the Vikings valued: strength, resilience, community, and respect for nature. It was more than just a shelter from the cold, it was a place where they could find warmth, not just in the fire but in each other. The longhouse was a place where survival was more than just enduring the harsh elements, it was about living fully, drawing strength from the bonds they shared, and ensuring that future generations would carry on their legacy. Even now, as the longhouse stands quiet and still, its essence remains. The lessons learned within these walls, the importance of community, the strength of unity, the deep connection to the land, continue to echo through the centuries. The longhouse was built to withstand the cold, but it was also built to withstand time. Its legacy lives on, not just in the wood and stone, but in the spirit of resilience, community, and survival that defined the Viking way of life. As you reflect on everything the longhouse represents, it becomes clear that it's more than just a building. It is a symbol of everything the Vikings were: resilient, resourceful, connected to nature, and fiercely loyal to their communities. The longhouse is a living testament to their ability to endure, not just the elements, but the trials of life. It's a place where, despite the harshest of winters, they created not just a home, but a way of life. A way of life that still echoes in the stories and the spirit that have been passed down through generations. The longhouse may stand empty now, but its legacy endures. The warmth of the hearth, the strength of the community, and the respect for the land will never fade. The Vikings' story continues, not just in the history books, but in the very walls of their homes, silent, steadfast, and enduring. The longhouse, now quiet and still, stands as a proud reminder of the Viking spirit. The fire has long since flickered out, but in the walls, in the very timber of the house, the memories of past lives still linger. The wind has calmed, but there is still a presence here, an unspoken connection to those who once filled this space. The longhouse may no longer be bustling with activity, but its legacy, its deep roots in Viking life remains just as vibrant. The lessons learned within these walls continue to resonate, echoing across time. As you reflect on this, it's clear that the longhouse was more than just a shelter. It was a symbol of Viking resilience, a physical manifestation of everything that made the Vikings who they were: their adaptability, their ingenuity, and their unyielding strength. It wasn't just a place to weather the storms of life. It was a space where the community was built, where families were nurtured, and where the traditions of the Viking people were passed down through generations. The central hearth, still imagined in the quiet darkness of the longhouse, was the heart of everything. It was where the Vikings gathered, where their spirits were revived, and where their collective memories were made. The hearth wasn't just a source of warmth, it was a place of connection, a shared experience that made every family member, neighbor, and guest part of the same story. The fire created not only physical warmth, but the emotional warmth that allowed Viking society to thrive, despite the brutal cold that surrounded them. You can almost hear the laughter, the voices of Viking families as they shared a meal, or told tales of gods, warriors, and battles. The Vikings may have faced incredible challenges, but within the walls of their longhouse, they found a sense of purpose and belonging. It was here that survival turned into something more than just enduring. It turned into living, loving, and being part of something much larger than oneself. The longhouse was a place where they drew strength from each other, from the land, and from the deep traditions they carried forward. The design of the longhouse, though simple, was intentional. Every part of it was crafted to support the lifestyle of the Viking people. The layout, with its open spaces and communal areas, encouraged interaction. The central hearth kept everyone close, physically and emotionally. The sleeping arrangements, though modest, were centered around warmth and togetherness. It was not just a place to escape the elements, it was a space where Vikings came together to live fully, in the company of family and friends. In a world where survival often depended on harsh conditions, the longhouse was a symbol of the Vikings' ability to not only endure, but thrive. The cold might have been unrelenting, but the warmth of the hearth, the bonds of the community, and the respect for nature made every longhouse more than just a building. It was a home, a sanctuary, and a reflection of everything the Vikings valued: connection, respect, and survival as a shared endeavor. What's truly remarkable, though, is that this survival wasn't just about the physical aspects of life. The longhouse also served as a space of spiritual connection. The Vikings' deep connection to the gods, nature, and the spirits of their ancestors was ever present. The hearth, the central feature of the longhouse, was not only a place of physical warmth but a sacred space. It was the place where offerings were made to the gods, where prayers were said for protection, and where Viking life was affirmed in the light of their spiritual beliefs. Even in the midst of the harshest winters, the hearth was a reminder that the Vikings were not alone. The gods were watching, and their blessings were sought in every action, in every ritual, and in every moment of life lived together. This intertwining of the physical and the spiritual is what made the longhouse so significant. It was a place where the Vikings found not just shelter from the cold, but a deeper sense of connection to each other, to their gods, and to the land they called home. It was a space where survival was not just a matter of enduring the physical world, but of living fully, with purpose, with love, and with respect for the forces that shaped their lives. The Viking longhouse may no longer be filled with the sounds of daily life, but its legacy remains. The strength of the Vikings lives on in the stories told around the hearth, in the traditions passed down through generations, and in the enduring spirit of the longhouse itself. It stands as a reminder that survival isn't just about making it through the storm, it's about enduring together, with a heart full of connection, resilience, and respect for everything that sustains us. And so, as the quiet of the night surrounds you, you realize that the Viking longhouse, in its simplicity and strength, is a timeless symbol of human endurance. It's not just a place to survive, it's a place to live, to love, to learn, and to honor those who came before. It's a place where the values of the Vikings community, resilience, respect, and strength continue to resonate, echoing across time, reminding us all that no matter the challenges we face, we can endure together. As the longhouse stands quietly in the wake of time, you can almost feel the presence of those who once filled it with life. The stillness of the night is profound, and the memories of Viking resilience, unity, and ingenuity are carried in the walls and beams, invisible yet unyielding. Though the fire has burned out and the family no longer gathers around the hearth, the essence of Viking life remains embedded in this structure, in the legacy of survival and connection it holds. Looking back at the longhouse, it becomes increasingly clear that it was more than a shelter. It was the heart of Viking society, a physical space that allowed them to not only survive, but to thrive in a world defined by harsh winters and unpredictable challenges. The longhouse wasn't just about enduring the cold, it was about creating warmth and purpose in the midst of adversity. And that warmth was found not only in the fire, but in the community that gathered around it. You can imagine the laughter, the sharing of food, and the passing down of stories through the generations. The Vikings, known for their ferocity and courage in battle, were also a people who understood the importance of unity, family, and connection. The longhouse, with its communal layout and central hearth, provided a space where survival was a collective effort. The close quarters of the longhouse may have forced families to live in intimate proximity, but in doing so, it encouraged a deeper sense of kinship, cooperation, and shared responsibility. The hearth, as the center of the home, wasn't just a place to stay warm. It was a place where the Vikings came together to share their days, their struggles, and their victories. It was where the wisdom of the elders was passed down, where the younger generations learned about their gods, their ancestors, and their place in the world. The fire that flickered in the hearth was a symbol of continuity, a link between past and present, a constant reminder that the Vikings were more than just survivors. They were a people bound by strong traditions, unbreakable connections, and shared values. As you reflect on the centrality of the hearth, it becomes clear that the Viking longhouse was designed with more than just practicality in mind. It was about creating a space that reflected the values the Vikings held: dear unity, respect for nature, and a deep connection to the spiritual and communal aspects of life. Every detail, from the construction of the walls to the arrangement of the sleeping areas, was designed to reinforce these values. The longhouse wasn't simply a place to escape the cold, it was a space that allowed the Vikings to live fully, to honor their past, and to ensure that their traditions would continue. Even now, as the longhouse stands empty, its design continues to speak to the Viking values that shaped it. The materials used: the timber from the forests, the animal hides, the moss used for insulation, are all a reflection of the Viking respect for the land. They didn't see nature as something to conquer. They saw themselves as part of it, working in harmony with the earth to ensure their survival. The longhouse was a testament to this philosophy, a structure that was built not just for shelter, but as a manifestation of their belief that humanity and nature could coexist, even thrive, together. The longhouse was also a space that allowed for spiritual connection. It wasn't just a place of physical warmth, but also a place of divine warmth. The Vikings, deeply connected to their gods, believed that their homes, like their people, were sacred. The hearth, central to every longhouse, was a place where they honored their gods, offered prayers, and gave thanks for their protection. It was here that the line between the mortal and divine worlds was blurred, where offerings to the gods were made, and where the spirit of Viking life was sustained not just by the warmth of the fire, but by the connection to the gods and the spirits of their ancestors. It's fascinating to think about how the Vikings integrated their spiritual beliefs into every aspect of their daily lives, including their homes. The longhouse wasn't just a structure for survival. It was a space that embodied their spiritual worldview. The central hearth, the sacred fire that burned brightly, was a constant reminder of their connection to the divine. The Vikings didn't just rely on their strength to survive. They called upon the gods, seeking their favor and protection. The longhouse, as a sacred space, played a pivotal role in maintaining this connection, serving as both a physical and spiritual refuge. The longhouse also reflects the Vikings' belief in community and kinship. They didn't face the challenges of their world alone. Whether in battle or in the quiet of their home, they relied on each other. The longhouse was where this sense of unity was nurtured and maintained. Each family, each individual, had a role to play in ensuring the well-being of the group. It wasn't just about physical survival. It was about sustaining the emotional and social bonds that held them together. The longhouse was not just a shelter from the storm, it was a place where survival became a shared, sacred experience. And as you sit in the quiet of the night, reflecting on all that the longhouse represents, you understand that it stands as a symbol of everything the Vikings valued. It wasn't just about surviving the cold or weathering the storms. It was about living fully, in harmony with the land, the gods, and each other. The longhouse was a physical embodiment of Viking life, where the values of community, respect for nature, and spiritual connection were lived out every day. The Viking longhouse may no longer be filled with the sounds of life, but its legacy remains. The lessons learned within its walls, the strength of unity, the importance of kinship, and the connection to the land and the divine continue to echo through the generations. The longhouse wasn't just a shelter, it was a place where the spirit of the Vikings lived, and in this quiet reflection, you can feel that spirit still. The longhouse stands in the stillness of time, its story etched into every beam and every stone. Though the storms have passed and the hearth's flames have long since died, the essence of what it meant to live within these walls remains palpable. The Vikings may have built their longhouses to survive the relentless cold, but what they created went far beyond practicality. They built sanctuaries, structures where life, in all its resilience and fragility, could flourish even against the odds. As you linger in this imagined space, you realize that the longhouse was more than just a home. It was a testament to the Viking understanding of what it meant to endure, not alone, but together. These were homes of unity, where every voice mattered, every role had value, and every person contributed to the shared survival of the group. From the youngest child to the eldest elder, each had their place in the rhythm of life that revolved around the hearth. The hearth, glowing brightly at the center of the longhouse, symbolized more than warmth. It was a gathering place, a source of sustenance, and a sacred space where offerings were made and blessings sought. The fire that burned within it wasn't just fuel for survival, it was a living link between generations, between the Vikings and their gods, between the harshness of their world and the hope that sustained them. The hearth was as much about spirit as it was about heat, and without it, the longhouse would have been just wood and stone. The materials chosen for these homes also tell a story. The timber, felled from nearby forests, represented both practicality and reverence. The hides stretched across the walls were both insulation and tribute to the animals that sustained them. Even the moss and sod packed into the walls carried significance. They weren't just fillers but reminders of the earth itself holding the home together. Every detail, every choice, spoke of a people who understood the balance between using nature's resources and respecting them. The longhouse was also a vessel of memory. Within its walls, stories of gods and ancestors were shared, weaving a fabric of cultural identity that endured beyond the cold winters. Here, Viking children learned the values of bravery, loyalty, and respect. They learned about the sea voyages, the battles, and the wisdom of those who came before. The longhouse wasn't just a physical shelter, it was a cultural sanctuary, a place where knowledge was preserved and passed down. You can almost hear the echo of these stories, whispered in the glow of firelight, binding the community together. It was this connection, the sharing of food, warmth, and tales that gave meaning to the longhouse. Without these, the house would have been merely timber and sod. With them, it became the beating heart of Viking society. Even now, in the silence of the present, the longhouse endures as a symbol of resilience. It reminds us that survival is rarely achieved alone. It takes community, connection, and a shared sense of purpose to truly endure the storms of life. The Vikings understood this, and they built their homes not just for shelter but for unity, for memory, and for hope. And so, as the night wears on, the longhouse remains, silent, strong, and timeless. a symbol of the Viking spirit, unyielding, communal, and deeply rooted in the balance between humanity and nature. The longhouse may no longer be filled with firelight or voices, but its legacy lives on in the lessons it left behind. That warmth is found not only in the fire, but in each other. As the night stretches on, the final echoes of the Viking longhouse seem to drift into the quiet. The fire has dimmed, leaving only the embers to reflect the past. Outside, the world is still, as if holding its breath. The storm has passed, and in its wake, the longhouse remains a silent monument to everything the Vikings stood for: resilience, unity, respect, and the enduring connection to the land they called home. This place, despite its quiet, holds the stories of 1,000 lives, each one woven into the very structure of the home. What becomes clear as you sit in this quiet reflection is that the longhouse was not merely a structure, it was the beating heart of Viking society. It was the center of their world, the place where survival was not just a physical act but a communal one. It was a space where life unfolded, where the bonds of family were strengthened, where work was shared, and where the spirit of the Vikings was kept alive. The longhouse was as much a vessel for memory as it was for warmth. It was where the stories of the gods and the heroes were told, where the wisdom of the elders was passed on, and where the future was shaped by the lessons of the past. The longhouse was also a reflection of the Vikings' relationship with nature. The Vikings didn't just take from the land, they respected it. The wood, the moss, the animal hides, everything used to build the longhouse had meaning. Each piece was chosen with care, not just for its function but for its connection to the natural world. The Viking way of life was about balance. They knew that survival wasn't about conquering nature but about working with it. The longhouse was a symbol of this harmony, built with materials sourced from the world around them, yet designed in such a way that it was both part of nature and separate from it, a place where the harshness of the world could be kept at bay. It's impossible not to think of the Viking community when imagining the longhouse. In a world where the cold could easily break the spirit, the longhouse was built to strengthen it. The warmth of the fire, the closeness of the family, the shared responsibility, all of these created a sense of belonging, and perhaps that is what the Vikings valued most. The longhouse wasn't just a place to survive, it was a place to live, to connect, and to share in something larger than the challenges of daily life. The longhouse, despite the passing of time, still holds these values. It stands as a reminder that survival is never a solitary endeavor. The Vikings knew that to survive the cold winters, the dangers of the wild, and the challenges of their world, they had to rely on each other. Their homes were not just shelters, they were places that nurtured the spirit of community. Every person, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, had a role to play. The longhouse was a place where everyone mattered, where everyone contributed, and where everyone's strength was needed. The Viking longhouse, though no longer filled with the sounds of life, continues to stand as a testament to the strength of human connection. It is a reminder that survival isn't just about enduring, it's about thriving, about creating something that outlasts the storms, the cold, and the challenges that life throws at us. The longhouse was built with love, with respect, and with the knowledge that together the Viking people could withstand anything. As the last of the embers fades into the quiet, the Viking longhouse stands tall, enduring the passage of time. Its walls, though weathered, are still strong. Its legacy, built on unity, strength, and respect for nature, remains as vital as ever. In the stillness of the night, the longhouse continues to speak to us, reminding us that the spirit of the Vikings lives on in every connection, every story shared, and every community built. The fire may be gone, but the warmth of unity and shared survival will never fade. Sweet dreams.